Ages ago, when I was a boy, one of my favorite things to do would be to have sleepovers with my friends, especially my friend Joe. Joe had the coolest house layout. It was big and it had this huge basement with a pool table, air hockey table, and the entire basement looped around in a big circle. And we'd often ride his scooters around the loop in the basement while on our sugar rushes after hours of playing video games and eating junk food. The best part was his parents could never hear us down there, as they slept all the way upstairs. I'll never forget the night that my mom dropped me off at Joe's house after dinner. It was the night before a holiday, so we didn't have school the next day. Joe and I went straight to the basement and started playing one of his new video games on his PlayStation 1, when suddenly the door to the laundry room in the back creaked open. We paused the game and turned around to look, and yes, the door was now cracked open. I told Joe to go check it out. He said it's fine, it happens sometimes. To be honest though, sometimes at night alone in his basement, Joe and I would get spooked. I told him to go shut the door because something about having that door open leading into a big pitch black laundry room was uncomfortable. I think he agreed because he got up to close it. After a while of playing video games, I started riding Joe's bike around the loop of the basement, which honestly was a lot more fun than it sounds. But then something else happened. There was a noise, almost like the sound of a laundry machine door being banged or closed. It came from the laundry room again, obviously. This time Joe and I ran up the stairs freaked out, and Joe called his dad to come check the laundry room. His dad opened the door to the laundry room, had a quick 5-second look, and calmly said there's no one in there. So he went back upstairs to bed, and Joe and I continued to hang out for another hour or two. Then it came time to go to sleep. There were 2 couches down there, one in front of the TV, and then another towards the back of the basement by the bar. I slept on the couch towards the back of the basement. I didn't sleep long though. I woke up and it was still pitch black in the basement. No light shining through the small basement windows. It was still the middle of the night. I rubbed my eyes and sat up after getting this weird feeling of being watched. "Joe?" I said, just checking if he was awake. After saying his name, I heard and saw something moving in the darkness to the laundry room. And then the door creaked shut. I jumped off the couch to wake up Joe, but when I got to his couch, he wasn't there. That's when I became wise to what was going on. Joe was trying to scare me. I tiptoed to the door of the laundry room. I figured I would reverse it on him and scare him instead. I put my hand on the doorknob, and after a little mental buildup, I yanked the door open and went inside screaming. I turned on the light to the room, but Joe wasn't in there. Where could he be hiding? In that moment, I was beyond confused. I knew he had to be in the room. Then I noticed something through the glass of the dryer machine. I walked over to it and knelt down. Someone was in the dryer machine, crunched up and like a ball. You know how dryer machine doors usually have a sort of tinted glass that's hard to see through? Well, while I knew there was a person in there, it took me a few seconds to catch on that the person that was in the dryer machine looking back at me was not Joe. It was some grown man. I started screaming and ran all the way upstairs to Joe's parents' room. Everyone in the house came out from their bedrooms in response, including Joe. Joe apparently was having a hard time falling asleep on the couch, so he went upstairs to his bedroom. I yelled there was someone hiding in the dryer machine. As Joe's dad started his way storming to the basement, somebody ran through the living room and out the front door. Joe's mom let out a scream as his dad ran outside in his slippers to try to catch the man. Of course, being that he was only in slippers, he didn't have a chance. When he came back, Joe's mom had already called the cops. When the cops came, they asked me if there was anything specific that I could make out about the man. All I could say was that he was wearing dark clothes. Joe and I slept in his room. I slept on the floor with a blanket, and we kept the door locked. We took a break from the sleepovers for a while after that. This happened quite some time ago. In fact, it happened back in July 2013. It was my 13th birthday party, and my friends and I had been to Manchester for the day, before heading back to my house for a sleepover. A couple of them had stayed over before, but some hadn't, so I wanted to make a good impression. We all decided to sleep downstairs that night, as there wasn't enough room in my bedroom. We gathered our sleeping bags on the living room floor, watched cheesy rom-coms, and ate junk food until around 1 a.m. So we decided to hit the sack after our third movie. We turned off the lights with the exception of one, as although we didn't like to admit it then, we were a little afraid of the dark. It's a common thing to lie awake and chat at a sleepover after you say you're going to sleep. We were in the middle of whispering to each other who we thought our celebrity lookalikes were, when we heard it. A loud knock on our window cut through our conversation. "What was that?" said Emma, one of my friends. "It's probably just my dad playing a prank or something," I said. Although this whole situation was kind of freaking me out, my dad had done this type of thing before, so I assumed it must have been him. We were beginning to calm down when suddenly another forceful knock came upon the window. This made some of my friends scream. I assured everyone that, like I said, it was probably just my dad being goofy. So I went over to the window to catch him red-handed. The curtains were closed, so I had to pull a section of them back to see who was outside. As I did, I came face to face with a man who was most certainly not my dad. This man was bald with very thin eyebrows, and he had a missing tooth. He was sort of hunched over, and he looked at me with widened, glassy eyes. I immediately screamed and closed the curtain. At this point, my friends and I were pretty hysterical, and Emma began visibly shaking in fear. My parents were upstairs, so instinctively, I ran up to find them. As I got upstairs, my mom was talking to someone from her window. I didn't quite catch their conversation, but she told me what happened soon after. She said that she heard the knocking too, and when she looked out of her window to see who it was, the man looked up and asked her if she had seen a friend of his. I can't remember the name of the guy she said she was looking for, so we'll call him Paul. He kept asking for him over and over. "Have you seen Paul? Where is Paul? Has Paul been here?" Of course, my mom said she didn't know anyone named Paul. Eventually, she had to ask him to leave us alone, as he just kept wandering around our driveway. As the man finally left, I went back downstairs to calm my friends down. In retrospect, I feel bad for leaving them alone down there when some weird stranger was on our property. We all settled back down after that. However, my mom's maternal instincts kicked in, so she wanted to make sure he was gone completely. She left briefly to go around the block in her car to make sure he wasn't still in the area. The street was dimly lit by impractical streetlights, so she had to put her high beams on. As she was driving, she saw someone dash across the middle of the road. Thinking it was just a kid, she just kept driving until the man who was at our window appeared again. But this time, he practically jumped in front of my mom's car. My mom quickly slammed on the brakes, but before she could confront him, he disappeared off into the night. We never found out who that guy was or what his true intentions were, and thankfully, we never saw him again. So much for wanting to make a good impression. My friend Jake slept over at my house one night when we were 12, and because of that, he may have possibly saved my life. It was a snowy weekend night. We watched a couple Christmas movies in my living room. My mom would bring us snacks and hot cocoa. She was always really nice to my friends when I had them over. My mom had to go to sleep kind of early because she worked. She and my dad had just recently divorced. By around 12, Jake and I went to my room, where we played Pokemon on our Game Boy Advances for a little. I don't remember much after that, besides falling asleep a little while later. I woke up in my bed to the room being extremely cold, and also feeling really thirsty. I went to the kitchen downstairs to get a cup of water. I noticed how much colder it had become upstairs as opposed to downstairs. I went back to my bed and tucked myself in. As I lay there trying to fall back asleep, I realized Jake was breathing weird, like a deeper, heavier breathing. It went on for some time, and after making a note of it in my head, it was all I could focus on, so I eventually threw a pillow at him. As he woke up, I told him to stop breathing so loud. He was confused as he looked up at me in my bed. He said, "What are you talking about?" I told him to just lower the volume of his breathing noises, as he was borderline snoring. Jake shifted his focus from me to down below my bed, and then he screamed. He crawled backwards until his back was pushing up against my dresser. I yelled, "What is it?" I hopped off my bed and looked under it where he was staring at. There was a middle-aged man with long hair laying underneath my bed, and he had his finger up to his lips saying, "Shh." It was a surreal sight to say the least. I felt like my heart was beating 200 beats per minute. The man whispered, "I know your mom. I'm here to see her." He started crawling out from under the bed. At that same moment, Jake and I ran from the room, screaming for my mom. We got to my mom's room and locked her bedroom door behind us. She was immediately distressed and confused by our screams. I barely had enough time to yell, "There's a man under my bed," before the doorknob to my mom's room started twisting and shaking. Then the sounds of the doorknob failing to turn shifted to heavy, aggressive bangs at the door. My mom ran to her phone and called 911. She was on the phone already in tears, while also screaming at the man on the other side of the door to leave us alone. The man tried kicking the door in, but I think when he heard my mom on the phone, he left the house. We were all in shock. It took the police only a couple minutes to arrive, at which point the coast was clear. The biggest window in our house, which was the window to the upstairs spare bedroom, was lifted up completely, which explained the cool air entering the house upstairs. That also explained the man's point of entry. I told my mom that man claimed he knew her, but she had no idea who this man could have been. My mom dropped Jake off home, and then she and I slept at my aunt and uncle's house for the rest of the night. The next day, my uncle installed a stronger lock on that upstairs window. This was like 16 years ago now. At this point, it's just a distant, haunting memory. But we never figured out who that man could have been, or how he could have possibly known my mother.
Working as a pizza delivery boy, you'll run into a lot of strange things. However, this story may be an excessive example of that. I was 21 years old, and it was a late Friday night shift at John's Pizza, meaning I would be closing with my boss. It was about 9 o'clock, an hour before closing. My next delivery was to the Saugerties, the next town over. The drive wasn't too long, maybe 15 minutes. I was a bit confused. The map was taking me to an isolated road that seemed to lead to nothing. I drove down it anyway, and shortly realized it led to a house by the water. It seemed every light in the house was on. Upon getting closer, I could hear music blasting from inside the house even with my windows shut. Strangely, there were only 2 cars parked in front of the house, at least from what I could tell. It was a pretty wide open property. The front of the house faced the water, so the road, or driveway I suppose, curved around to the front by the water. As I walked up to the front door, I took more notice to the fact that the house was like brand new. I then rang the bell a few times since the music was so loud. I was caught completely off guard when 2 women opened the door, one blonde and one brunette, barely clothed. They had huge, flirty grins on their faces. The blonde woman grabbed the pizza while the brunette handed me a 20. I was about to ask where everyone was, but the brunette called me cute and asked me for my number. I thought I was about to get extremely lucky. After giving her my number, I was about to attempt at getting myself invited in, but the blonde immediately did that for me anyway. I entered the house and picked up on a rather unpleasant odor almost immediately, and there were literally no people anywhere, but I didn't care that much. The 2 women began to lead me upstairs, but unfortunately, this story did not go in the direction you may have hoped it would. I was literally on the second step when a horrifying scream for help came from upstairs. I looked up there and then at the two women. They were looking at each other. The blonde one very clearly mouthed the word shit to the brunette. I didn't even really piece everything together at that moment, but I still just kind of instinctively knew to run. I must have looked back like 20 times before I was able to turn around the car and drive back down the long driveway. Looking back through the mirror, I shit you not, at each and every one of the windows in the house, there were heads peering out to me as I drove away. Of course, I called the police on my way back to work and told them to check the place out. They did, and some investigator guy called me back not even an hour later, telling me whoever was there abandoned the place, and that, in fact, it was a brand new, just-built vacant house for sale. It didn't surprise me much. There was no party going on there. That same night, I got a text saying, "We know where you work." That was enough to drive me to quit that job. Since I mentioned a possible victim upstairs to the police, they came to my house to ask a series of questions about the people. I have also had my number changed since then, as I want no possible links to this incident, and I want to live with peace of mind. So it was my last delivery of the night at Domino's Pizza to a house that was about 10 minutes away from the shop. There was a note on the door, which I read after ringing the bell. It said, "To Pizza Guy, please let yourself in and leave the pizza in the upstairs bedroom. Money will be on the bed." Immediately, red flags were springing up in my head all over. I actually called my boss and told him I didn't feel safe going in there, and he actually told me it would be best to just go inside. I tried to use my charm, as people say I have, to persuade my boss, but he was hell-bent on me not bringing back that pizza. The door was unlocked, so I let myself in. It was an average-sized house with some furniture that seemed a bit aged. There was a small nightlight shaped like a candle on the wall, providing just enough light to see a bit into the living room and my way upstairs. There were no lights in any of the rooms up there, just another candle nightlight. More red flags going off in my head. I come to the end of the small hallway upstairs. There are two doors, one open, one shut. The open door leads into a dark room, which I had to guess was the bedroom. As you may imagine, I was shaking in my shoes, afraid for any sudden sounds or movements anywhere. I pushed the door open completely and pressed my hand against the wall looking for the light switch. Found it. I flicked it on. Nothing. The lights didn't seem to work in this room. I very slowly walked over to the center of the room until something cushiony stopped my leg. It was a bed. I placed the pizza on the bed and began to search for the money in the dark. Just then, I heard the faintest, quietest thing come from outside of the room. I lifted my head and then resumed searching even faster. I was hoping to God it was just some kind of old person living here and they were too sick or nervous or whatever to meet someone. I found the money. It felt like 2 bills. I hoped they were 10s. I put them in my pocket and left the room. I stopped outside the room and saw the door to the other room was open. I could have sworn it was shut earlier. Your pizza's on the bed. Have a great day." I myself could hear the shake in my voice. There was no kind of response. I started to lean into the dark room to maybe get a better view. Too dark. I reached my hand into the room and searched for a light switch, but something grabbed my arm with a painfully tight grip and tried pulling me into the room. I screamed and jabbed at the arm with my keys, finally breaking free and getting back to my car. Nothing chased me out, nobody followed my car. I told my boss about it, and even talked him into giving me a raise for making me go through that hell. He didn't want me to call the cops for whatever reason. It wasn't really on the top of my mind, but in hindsight, I guess it would have made sense to get the police to check that place out. Anyway, not everything was terrible. I did get my pay raised from $7.50 to $8.50. I was never the delivery boy when I worked at Gino's Pizzeria, but when the new kid called out sick on like his second day, I had to take over for the night. It was a slow Tuesday night for deliveries, so it wasn't too bad. I had a manual 1998 Ford Mustang, a gas guzzler, so I in no way wanted to beat that car around town delivering pizzas. I made 3 normal deliveries within 3 hours. The place closes at 9 on weekdays, so I estimated 1 or maybe 2 more deliveries for the night. I picked up the phone to a customer who sounded like the definition of a meth head or something. She had a raspy voice, she stuttered, she forgot what she was saying, she had long pauses. Literally, there was like a 10-second gap between her saying, "Can I just get and regular pizza?" It was a huge production just getting the address from her. Sounded like she was asking someone in the background what the address was. Well, I was just so excited to meet these people. After she gave me the address, she hung up without me even telling her the price or how long. I told my chef, whose name was actually Mario, I know, a bit cliche, 1 regular pie. 10 minutes later, I was on my way. We live in the middle of absolute nowhere, so each delivery was a longer trip with a bigger tip. It took probably 10 minutes for me to get to the location. There was a long and dark gravel road through the woods and occasional trailer homes I had to drive through until I finally reached their home. It was a trailer home. The lights were off inside, but I could see the orange glow of a fire coming from out back, and I could hear a woman yelling at someone. When I shut the passenger side door after grabbing the pizza, I noticed the curtains to one of the windows move. Somebody was just watching me. I didn't know if I should knock on their door or go around back. It sounded like there was more than one person back there, so I decided to just go around back. I greeted them, and they spun around faster than a bullet. They were disgusting. They looked like typical trailer trash meth heads. The woman looked at, I'm guessing her husband, and asked what he's doing here. He then scolded her, saying she was the one who gave the address. They seemed to be standing close together to hide something behind them, and quite frankly, I didn't want to see what it was. I asked them if I should go around front, and then they whispered something to each other. The woman pointed at me and told me to wait there. She would go get the money. She went inside, and for the next 2 minutes, I awkwardly stood there trying not to stare at the scary-looking guy, who I knew was staring at me the whole time. Finally, the woman emerged from the house and went back next to the man. She handed the man some money and asked him to count it. She whispered something after that. I was getting very nervous now. I felt as if they were going to try and rob me or something. I wasn't stupid. The man started counting the money very slow. I mean, really slow, like 5, 10. I kept my eyes on the woman. She was looking into the woods behind me. And then she nodded her head, staring off behind me, and saw some huge guy approaching me with an axe in his hand. I flung the pizza box at him to try and slow him down, and somehow it worked. Or maybe he just didn't chase me. I got home safely. I didn't even go back to work that night. When Mario the chef texted me, I told him what happened, and all he said was, "Holy shit." That was it. I'm happy that was the only night I had to deliver. So if you live in the suburbs or city, sure, be a pizza boy. But if you live in the middle of nowhere, maybe try the supermarket instead.
At the age of 17, I was working as a pizza delivery boy for a local pizza place. I was doing it for months by this point. I had done countless deliveries already. My first car was an old, cheap Toyota, so it was perfect for bopping around town with. It was a Friday or Saturday night. I was working the closing shift, which was 12 a.m. It was open later on weekends. This was towards the end of the night, past 11 for sure. My boss, who I'll just call Mario, would always give me the details for the houses I'd be delivering to and their orders. We had an order for 1 pie to a woman named Karen, ironically. It was an unusually long drive away, about 15 minutes. Most orders come locally around the area, like 5 minutes away on average. I expected a better tip for this reason. I brought the pizza to my car and off I went, listening to my usual playlist on the way. I pulled down the block of the address and pulled up in front of the house. It was a small-sized house, as were most of the houses in the area. It seemed to be a lower-income area. The lights were on in one of the rooms on the first floor. I was approaching the door when suddenly a woman called out from a window from the house next door saying, "Excuse me, that pizza's for us. We gave the wrong address." So I walked next door to the front door and saw that the doorbell was broken. So I opened the storm door and then knocked really loud on the main door. There wasn't an answer for a good 30 seconds, so I knocked again, and I heard a woman's voice on the other side yell, "1 second," but they still took forever to open the door. Another minute passed before the door finally opened, and a woman in probably her mid-40s answered the door. She right away smiled at me and gave this flirtatious head-to-toe stare at me as if she were checking me out. She said in a very loud voice, "Chels, come look how handsome the delivery boy is." Another woman about the same age came over to the door, and she did the same thing. Right away I felt my cheeks getting red, as I was a bit shy around older women like that. The woman who opened the door, who I'm assuming was Karen, asked me what time I get off work. And that was when I started getting really nervous because I wasn't good at flirting with women at that age. I said this is probably my last delivery, and then one of the women asked me if I wanted to come in and have some wine with them. I knew my friends would all rip on me forever if I blew this opportunity, so I said yeah, sure. They asked how old I was, and I said 21, and then they both laughed, and one of them said they don't care if I'm under 21. They told me to sit on the couch, so I did, and they both sat on either side of me. This whole encounter felt too good to be true to me. Nothing like this had ever happened to me before. I had a feeling these two women were already very drunk. From here, the women are both being very flirty with me, commenting on my dimples, saying how cute my shyness was, and all this stuff. I was drinking some wine pretending like it didn't taste disgusting to me, because I didn't drink wine at that age at all. The woman Chelsea started saying that they want to show me something in the basement. I laughed and said, "What is it?" They both laughed and said it's a secret, but that I'll like what it is. They wanted me to go down first. Honestly, I had my own fantasy about what was going to happen in the basement. Unfortunately, it was nowhere near that. I walked over to the doorway of the basement and looked down into the darkness below. I looked back at them and noticed they weren't laughing anymore. They had these blank faces. Only until they noticed me look back at them and they started to laugh and smile again. I said in a firm voice, "What's down there?" They said almost in unison, "It's a surprise." I started to walk slowly down into the basement, asking where the light switch is. One of them said, "Leave the lights off." Now this part I'm not 100% certain of, but I was looking down into the basement and I thought I saw something move. Something as in a person's arm or hand. I turned around and saw the two women weirdly creeping towards the door sneakily. I stepped out of the basement and shut the door. I told them I need the money for the pizza as I nervously walked around them closer to the front door. This was when I spotted the towering huge man standing in the doorway of an adjacent room, probably the kitchen. His 5 words have stayed with me all these years later. He said, "Let's just make this easy." I turned for the door and said the pizza's free. I ran to open it and slammed it behind me, only to hear it open seconds later. I got in my car, locking the door first thing, and that man was already outside my passenger side window looking in. He tried opening the door and then knocked on the glass. I put it in drive and got out of there not looking back. I got back to work and told my boss what happened and why I came back empty-handed. He and the rest were in shock. I called the non-emergency number to report what happened, just in case if anything else should be reported at that address again, the police would know something awful's going on in that house. Whatever trap I was about to walk into, thank God I didn't find out what it was. When I was 19 years old, I was still working at a nearby pizza place to help pay for food and gas and stuff. The job was always pretty easy, just taking the order, boxing up the food when it's done, putting it in a bag, and driving it to the given address. I'd done it a million times before, and nothing weird ever happened. It was very repetitive. Tips would usually be around $3 to $5 depending on the distance. Sometimes more generous people would give 10 or more though. I remember this order was just a chicken parm hero and a regular slice. Smaller orders like this usually yielded lesser tips, but I didn't have a choice in which deliveries I did. I was on my way to the address, and of course, the house was apparently on a dead-end block. This block had a more rural feel to it than the rest of the neighborhood. One of the houses had an RV sitting on the grass with a small patch of woods next to it. The other houses looked like little farmhouses. There was a lot more space on this particular street. And then I pulled up to the address. It was this small, weird-looking house with a huge property, though. It sat next to what appeared to be an abandoned house with overgrown grass and shrubs. It was probably around 6 p.m. and it was getting pretty dark out, so it was around the time people would start putting on their lights inside their houses. But all the lights in the house were off, and I noticed the front door seemed cracked open. I began to walk over to the front door, and I heard a piano being played. It sounded like it was a couple rooms away at least, muffled by some walls or a door or something. I knocked on the door and then rang the bell after a few minutes, only the doorbell didn't work. The piano was still playing. I felt weird just walking in, so I walked around the property towards the back. The backyard was a literal mess, things scattered all over the grass. I even saw a broken, rusty chain-link fence just sitting in the middle of the yard. I went to the back door and knocked really loud. I looked through the glass of the door and saw nothing except for what looked like a really messy storm room. Clearly these people were not neat freaks, to say the least. When nobody answered the back door either, I went back around front and called one of the guys at the pizzeria to confirm the address with him. He took a second to check what he wrote down, and he confirmed that I was at the correct address. So I went back to the front door, pushed it open, and heard the creepy sounding piano music still playing. I yelled, "Pizza's here." The piano stopped, someone yelled, "Over here," then the piano resumed. They were playing this simple yet creepy repetitive song as if on loop. There were also no lights on in this house, so it was almost hard to see in there. I walked straight, getting closer to the sound of the music. The smell inside the house was very musty and off-putting. When I got halfway into, I guess what you'd call the foyer, I felt very uncomfortable. I wasn't going to go any further. I yelled, "I'm by the front door, sir." The music stopped, this time for good, and now there was just silence. I backed towards the door again so that I would be closer to the outside. I was expecting to hear footsteps coming towards me, but no, it was just dead silent. I said, "Sir?" And a voice from another room said, "Yes, sorry, I have trouble walking. Could you just bring it in here, please?" I asked, "What room are you in, sir?" And he took a moment to answer back, "If you just walk through the living room, I'm in the dining room." There were no directions on the phone to do any of this, so this was very strange. I thought for a second about my next course of action. I felt bad leaving in the case that this was some old, feeble man just living in a messy house. I started walking through the living room, and there was an opening that led to what I presumed to be the dining room. Me being my overly cautious and paranoid self was still suspicious. Instead of walking straight into the dining room, I peeked around the wall just enough for one eye to see into the room. I saw the piano, but there was no one sitting at it. I also didn't see anyone in the entire room. With that, I quietly but quickly walked back towards the front door, shut the door behind me, and drove back to the pizzeria. I explained that I got a sketchy vibe inside the house. My boss was completely understanding, especially when the alleged customer didn't call back asking why I left. That said everything. I didn't really understand the logic in trying to commit a robbery in your own house, and nor did my boss or coworkers. So later that night after work, I looked up that address, and that house was foreclosed on months ago, and it had been vacant. When I told this to everyone, they had the same mouth-dropping reaction I did. I was truly mere steps away from probably getting robbed. That, or someone was trying to play a horrible prank on an unsuspecting pizza delivery guy. It was my last week working at an Italian restaurant. It was a half pizzeria, half Italian restaurant, so my duties would switch from shift to shift. Sometimes I'd work the front register in the pizzeria, sometimes I'd be a busboy in the restaurant side, and sometimes I'd be doing deliveries. I liked doing deliveries the most because I'd make tip money, so it was ironic that I left this job with a horrible, scarring experience doing a delivery. It was a late night delivery. Of course, this is when the shady things happen. We got an order for 3 specialty pizzas. It was a big order, probably like $70 worth of pizza. It was on the bad side of town. This was already a minor red flag. Good thing I drove a crappy old Civic and wouldn't draw any negative attention out in that area, or so I thought. It was a 15-minute drive at least, and when I got to the house, I went up to ring the bell. The door opens within seconds, and this Latino man opens the door halfway, sees the pizzas, opens it fully, exposing the pistol in his hand. I'm not a gun person, but if I had to guess, I'd say it was a Colt 45, but I wasn't really paying attention to what kind of gun it was. My heart basically dropped out of my ass at the first sight of it and realizing the situation. Then 2 more Latino men came to the door and grabbed me while the first one still had me at gunpoint. They were yelling in Spanish at each other. Then the guy with the gun says in broken English, "Give me all of your stuff." I said okay, as I could barely breathe or speak due to my panic. I grabbed my wallet, which was all I could really offer him. He then yelled, "Phone," and I gave him my phone as well. It was a Motorola Razr, the iPhone of the 2000s pretty much. One of them even forcibly grabbed my wrist and yanked off my watch. Thankfully, it wasn't an expensive watch. After this, one of them grabbed my ID out of my wallet and read out my address. Then they threatened me, basically saying if I told anybody about this, they'd come to my address and kill my whole family. I said okay, I understand, wanting to cry for help and for my life, but I couldn't. They then pushed me out of the house down the stoop, causing me to land on my hands and knees and start to bleed. They slammed the door shut, and all I had left on me now were my keys. I didn't return back to the pizzeria. I was too shaken and disturbed. I went home, noticeably quiet and shaky. My parents picked up on it. They also saw my scuffed up shorts and my bloody knees. They knew something was wrong, and they tried prying it out of me. I had to tell them the truth. I told them I was robbed at gunpoint on a delivery, and they had our address and threatened to come kill us if I reported them. My dad, who had connections with the police department, right away called the number of one of his close friends, and they immediately did a background check of the person living in that house. His name was Rodrigo. He had 4 prior felony convictions. And so, my dad, with the help of his police connections, ignoring the threat from the man with the gun, had a squad of police cars surround the house and enter the house with their guns drawn. I wasn't there, of course, but we heard a description of the scene through my dad's connections. 2 of the 3 men were still in the house and were arrested and charged. The man who had 4 convictions already got a life sentence. One of the guys by his side had a prior conviction and was sentenced to 5 years. The 3rd guy wasn't in the house, and I don't think they ever found him. To this day, he's still out there for all I know. And on several occasions since then, I've woken up to sounds from outside when the windows are open, like footsteps on the side walkway to the backyard, or the gate swinging open and closed. It could just be my imagination or being paranoid, but I do still worry for my and my family's well-being. Enough time has passed now that I think that man fled the country, or at the very least knows better than to ever show his face in this town again. But still, it is something that hangs in the back of my mind. My dad served in the Vietnam War from 1960 to 1962. For the longest time, he didn't tell anyone outside of the family this story, but he's in his mid-80s now, and he doesn't care about me sharing it with anyone. Not that I intend to release any of our names. I've heard this story told by him 5 times now, and each time I learn about new details he hadn't mentioned the time before. He didn't like to tell this story for obvious reasons, I think. Not only is thinking back to any of those events probably traumatizing, but also he would always say he felt it would be an inappropriate family gathering discussion. My dad did a lot of things in the war. At one point, he was what was known as a tunnel rat, which was a soldier who performed underground search and destroy missions, usually in underground tunnels. My dad and 2 of his comrades were crawling through a deep tunnel, expecting to hit a booby trap or run into an ambush, but the tunnels were surprisingly empty and silent. My dad describes the experience of crawling through the silent, dark tunnels as bone-chilling and adrenaline-pumping, as the fear of instant death at any moment would linger. My dad and his comrades heard a faint yelling and crying sound further down the tunnels. It was of a woman. As they crawled deeper into the tunnels, the cries and screams became more clear. And it was obvious there was a woman screaming for help. The three picked up their pace, worried of a potential hostage or a prisoner situation. As they continued to crawl through the tunnels, the cries for help got a little louder and clearer. They arrived to a small room that they could slightly get off their knees in. The ceiling was just high enough to half stand, half crouch. There was a small table with a lantern on it that was still lit. There were also 2 broken chairs and a locked safe box with some metallic objects that would rustle around inside the box when shaken. Aside from that, this small room was empty. However, the tunnel continued past this room. So they continued deeper into the tunnel, but the screams for help had stopped at this point. My dad described this horrible, familiar stench of death that soon became overwhelming in the tunnels. They entered one final room with no further tunnels. My dad still refuses to describe everything that was in this room in detail, other than there were multiple bodies, and they weren't killed by just bullets. They looked as though they'd been mutilated by some kind of creature. One of the bodies was that of a woman. The scene was so horrible that my dad and the 2 other tunnel rats had to turn around and flee. They had no explanation for what could have done what was seen in that room. On their crawl back out of the tunnels, they started hearing the cries for help from that woman's voice again. My dad says he and his comrades froze and looked at each other with wide eyes and obvious fear in their faces. They had made it to the end of that tunnel. There were no living things from there to the end of it, yet those screams for help were coming from the direction that they just were. They picked up their pace even more. My dad was in the back of the group of 3, and he says he would look back every 10 seconds, thinking he was hearing sounds from behind him, fearing he would see someone or something approaching from the darkness. They made it back to the surface eventually, and marked the entrance with a flag that signified to his team that the tunnel had been searched and cleared. Most tunnels would be interconnecting as a means of underground transportation and cover, but my dad says this tunnel was unusual to abruptly end. He says it was easily the most gut-wrenching, horrific, nightmare-inducing thing he'd experienced in his entire 2 years in Vietnam. My basic training for the Air Force was at Lackland Air Force Base in San Antonio, Texas. After that, I was sent to Shepherd Air Force Base for technical school, and after my graduation, I received orders to McGuire Air Force Base in New Jersey. There, my job was aerospace mechanic at first. I started on the night duty, unfortunately, so my sleep schedule was basically non-existent. My duties basically were lugging plane parts like anti-ice valves, igniters, ignition exciters, sensors, and more from the warehouse to the flight line. It was for the most part boring, repetitive work, especially at night. A lot of sitting around and playing games on my phone, but nobody heard that from me. It had to be like 4 a.m. at this point. I was waiting for the other guy to come drop off some parts to the flight line. He'll be referred to as Mark for the purpose of this story. I was waiting by the back cargo area of the plane we were working on at the time, sitting on a box scrolling through my phone. Mark was taking an incredibly long time with his delivery, so I shot him a few texts. When they went unresponded to, I tried calling him a few times. The calls rang 4 times, then went to voicemail. I figured he was either screening his calls, lost his phone, or was just very busy at the moment. I waited and waited, and he never showed up. Eventually I got a call from Mark's number, so I picked up, but it wasn't Mark's voice on the other end. It was some random guy. He sounded like a grown man in his 40s. He said he saw I tried calling a few times and said he found this phone on the ground outside of the base. I described what Mark looked like and asked him if he had seen anyone who may have resembled him. He said he had not. It's not like he would have been allowed on the base, so my only option was to drive out there and meet him. I asked him where he was, and he gave me the name of a nearby joint where I agreed to meet him. I walked to my car, which was parked in the closest parking lot, and I drove off the base towards the place he told me to meet him. While I was mid-drive, I remembered Mark was sharing his location with me. Long story, but we basically met these 2 girls this one night while off base who we separated from each other with. We, as a joke, started sharing our locations with each other in case we got quote-unquote murdered, as we kept joking. We joked about it mainly because we met them at a sketchy dive bar, but I'm not about to get into that. The place the man on the phone told me to meet him was called Tara's Tavern in Cookstown, the closest town to the base. I pulled up the location of Mark's phone and it checked out. It showed Mark's phone location right next to Tara's Tavern. This begged the question, what was that man doing there this late? At this hour the place wasn't open, and there were 0 cars on the road. I pulled into the little parking lot and parked. I stepped out and called Mark's phone again. The guy picked up, and he spoke in a noticeably lower voice now. I told him I was in the parking lot of the pub, and he said he was as well. He said in almost a whisper, "I'll be right over." Then he hung up. It was weirder in the moment than it sounds explaining it. I looked at the location on my phone to see if it was updating, but it seemed the location of Mark's phone was in this small patch of woods about 200 feet long and 200 feet wide. I tried calling again, and it went straight to voicemail. I looked around the whole parking lot but didn't see anyone. I was all alone. Not even an occasional passing car. I looked to the woods when I heard something over the sound of the crickets, like someone's footsteps. And then I saw a man. It was him. He was standing just behind the tree line between the woods and the parking lot. He called to me, "Are you alone?" And the sight of him, only his upper body visible, it was freaky as hell. I called back, "No, why?" as I inched my way closer to my car. This was one giant red flag. He called back, "Who are you with?" I didn't answer that. I got in my car and drove back to base. I called my supervisor and told him Mark was missing and someone was hiding in a patch of woods with his phone. My supervisor told me he was with Mark at that moment. He told me to meet them at the small building by the flight line. I met with the two and told them once again what I witnessed when tracking his phone. Mark told me what happened. While off the base, he was approached by somebody outside of a 24/7 convenience store asking for a ride back to the base. Mark believed that he was actually in the Air Force at first and let him in the car. But as they were driving, the man asked Mark to pull over by the woods so he could pee real quick. Mark obliged for some reason. As Mark was pulled to the side of the road by the same small patch of woods by Tara's Tavern, he wasn't paying attention for a minute, and his door was opened by the man. Without a second to even react, the man was grabbing Mark's arms and squeezing them as he tried to pull him out of the car. Mark said he kicked at the man's groin area until he let go. He dropped his phone and it fell out of the car during the struggle, but as he was free, he drove the car away with the door still open at first. And next thing that happened was he went back to the base to talk with our supervisor. We of course called the police and all went to Tara's Tavern to check if the man was still there. The location of Mark's phone was no longer popping up on the map. It's possible the man destroyed the phone. All we did was file a police report. Some people out there are actually crazy and dangerous. Who knows what he would have done to either of us if he had gotten us in the woods. During my days as a Marine, I had many different jobs on site, but my least favorite was graveyard patrol. At one point, I was one of the few with the overnight graveyard patrol shift for a nearby memorial cemetery. As you would imagine, it was a pretty slow shift with not much going on. Oddly enough, even though the cemetery was in a remote location surrounded by dense forest on each side, and I was working the literal graveyard shift, I found the job more relaxing than scary or unnerving. I would be the only one in the cemetery, and my relief would come around 4 a.m., which would be the end of my shift. So this had to have happened past 3 a.m., nearing the end of my shift. It was on this otherwise regular night that I was patrolling near the perimeter fence where some of the older headstones were. I wasn't allowed to be on my phone. If I were to be caught with my phone, I would be reprimanded. Even though it was unlikely to be caught since there was no one else really around except for me, I tried my best to follow that rule. So it was just a lot of walking around and looking at old headstones. But anyway, while patrolling past some of the older ones, I began to hear a woman's humming. It was this very calming, soothing kind of humming, only I wasn't calmed or soothed, because nobody was supposed to be in the cemetery, so it was more so a cause for concern. I started following the sounds of the humming. It was coming from behind this intentionally planted line of thick trees with vines and brushes sprouting from the sides of them. Instead of walking around the long wall of trees, I squeezed through the vines and bushes to the other side, cutting myself in the process. As I struggled to make it to the other side, the humming suddenly stopped as quickly as it started. I was left alone to the silence once again, not even the sound of a cricket. I walked closer to the edge of the memorial property, by the woods, near a few of the big mausoleum-looking structures, and I could distinctly hear some kind of buzzing sound coming from one of them. I stepped up the 3 white steps into the structure. The little door didn't have any kind of locks on it. I'd never been in any of these structures until this point, and I was incorrect in my assumption that they were mausoleums. I still don't know what the purpose of them were, maybe some kind of memorial building for deceased veterans in the cemetery. As I was inside that cold, dark structure, I could actually feel the hairs on my arms begin to stand up as I got goosebumps for reasons I wasn't sure of just yet. That buzzing sound was coming from inside of the structure, but it almost seemed like it was coming from beneath my feet. I looked down to the wood floor, and there were tiny round holes in each plank of wood it seemed. Big enough to look through, but way too dark down there to see what lay below the floorboards. I had an idea. I positioned my phone on the floorboard just right so that the flashlight would shoot light into the hole in the wood, and I would look through one of the other holes. I lay basically flat on the floor with my head pressed up to the wood, one eye closed. I expected to see nothing at all, but I saw what appeared to be the top of a woman's head, and as if she knew I started looking immediately, she looked up at me through the hole. I only saw her face for maybe half a second before I fell backwards and let out a blood-curdling scream. I sprinted back to the parking lot and called the guy who was supposed to relieve me soon, and I told him to meet me now. When he showed up, I tried to convince him that I was telling the truth about what I'd seen in that little building. He entertained me by coming with me to it, and I repeated what I did earlier with my phone flashlight. He looked through multiple holes but saw nothing. I had to check for myself, and he was right. It was just some small, empty-looking space underneath the structure. I spent the rest of the shift with him. I left at 4 on the dot. I know he didn't believe me. I wouldn't have believed me either. I'm sure it's a possibility that it was a hallucination as a result of my lack of sleep. But I also believe it's a possibility that I witnessed a spirit or something completely supernatural. I'd heard so many older Marines and veterans tell of supernatural experiences they had while serving. I don't know who the woman that I saw could have been if it truly wasn't my imagination, but it chills me to the bone to imagine it having been one of the women buried in the cemetery.
I started at 16 in my town in the suburbs of a big city. At first they put me to help the chef in the kitchen and clean the place and stuff. 2 months later, my boss told me that on the days off of the main delivery boy, I would deliver, and I said yes, of course. Then all of a sudden, the delivery boy quit when he came from delivering a pizza at this one house. He looked traumatized and shaken, like something with his face and his eyes. He went into my boss's office and they argued for about 15 minutes. Then he came out and said, "Good luck, kid," then told me he had quit. I asked why and he said, "Just a shitty job, that's all." He then patted me on the back and left. I knew it was something else than just a shitty job, but I didn't think much of it. That was the last time I saw him. So for the next couple of weeks, I was the delivery boy till they could find someone that can deliver pizzas. About 2 weeks into me delivering pizzas, my boss gave me the address to a house, and as usual I put in the GPS and went over. Watching the sunset while driving over there, I was hoping it'd take 2 minutes tops so I could get home. Unfortunately, it was in the rural side of town, where the houses are like a quarter mile from each other. I stopped in front of the 2-floor house and looked at it. I got the creepiest feels when I stared at it. Lawn not cut, with weeds, dead trees, and the old porch with no chairs or flower pots or tables, just plain. It seemed abandoned, but I got out anyways and knocked on the door. I was hoping my boss gave me the wrong address or something so I could get the hell out of there. Then the door lock started to shake and the door opened. It was an old lady, at least 70 years old or something around there, with white hair, teeth missing, and skinny, very short too, but her eyes just glaring at me. It really freaked me out. I figured if I was nice, things would turn out okay after all. "Pepperoni pizza, ma'am?" I said as friendly as I could. "Yes," she said with a hoarse voice as if she had a sore throat. "Alrighty, here you go." I handed the pizza over, but she just looked at it with no emotion and didn't take it, getting her purse. "Did you come with someone else?" I froze, then quickly looked up at her, still glaring at me. That question really frightened me. No, I said. Where's the other one? He ran off on me last time he came. Ran off, I thought. It didn't make sense. He quit some weeks ago, I said. Then she got her purse and started searching for money, or so I thought. She did for about a minute, the longest minute ever, and with the hands in her purse, she stopped and looked at me, not in a look of surprise or in confusion, but just like as if she was thinking really hard on something. I could tell she was holding something in her right hand inside the purse, but I couldn't see what. I really started to freak out at this point. What if it was pepper spray, or a knife, or even a gun? I mean, what could take her so long to get $10 out of her purse? Then, behind her, I saw a shadow, a silhouette of a man coming to the door, and all of a sudden, I heard footsteps crushing the leaves on my left side next to the porch, and a man's deep voice saying, "Hey." I looked over and saw a head of a middle-aged man with a look of anger peeking over the porch. This guy then started to climb the porch, and that was when I realized I had enough. I darted to my car, threw the pizza inside, turned it on, and drove off. I didn't look back as I drove off in the dark. I had to lie and pay for the pizza out of my own pocket, but it was worth it. On the day I quit, I decided to tell my boss what happened that evening, to which he freaked out as well and asked me why I hadn't told him. He said James told him something like he just walked out of there and didn't pay attention to her. My boss then called the cops to look into the sketchy situation, and he told me I could leave. About 2 days later, he called back, saying the cops had the house registered as foreclosed for over a year, and they found 3 people living in there when they broke in, which were 2 men and the old lady I encountered. They were arrested, and he didn't tell me anything else. I'm still traumatized, and I don't know what would have happened if I would have waited. They could have easily jumped me, but thank God I quit afterwards, and I'm still alive. I'll never forget the time I was covering my friend's shift at a pizzeria we worked at. He was the delivery boy, while I was usually the one manning the register. On that night, I made 2 real deliveries to normal people. Then, my manager gave me one final delivery for the night. It was 5 miles away, which was a long drive for what I was used to. The GPS told me to turn off the highway into some very quiet town. Somehow, I'd never even heard of this town. The GPS took me down some side roads that were even more dead than the main streets in this town. Half of the street lights weren't even on. I didn't like the looks of this place. I just wanted to deliver the pizza and be gone. So I arrived to the house. It was a single-floor little thing. I rang the bell, and almost immediately the door swung open. There was an older man, maybe in his upper 50s, that opened the door. His few hairs left on his head were gray, and he had a very pale face with a gray mustache. He gave me a smile and told me he'd be right back. He walked away into his house out of view, and I just stood there in the cold, waiting for him. I was a little uncomfortable with the area, and the looks of the guy answering didn't help. The sound of stomping on the creaky floors inside the house came to the door, as the man appeared back in the doorway with a smile. He said I should come inside where it's warm while I waited. I told him it's okay, but he just started nudging for me to come inside. I cannot justify my actions, but it was like 5 degrees outside. I foolishly stepped inside the sketchy stranger's house. He shut the door behind me and stepped off into another room in a hurry. It wasn't even much warmer in the house. He clearly didn't even have a heating system. I found myself creeping closer and closer to the door as I got more uncomfortable. Then, the man came out of another room and gave me another smile. He opened up a door, apparently leading to the basement. He looked down and told me that he normally leaves his money down there. He asked me to come down there with him, but I refused. Even from where I was standing, I could see it was totally pitch dark down there. And then, what happened next is where it all fell apart. I heard the sound of a creaking step coming from the basement. Somebody else was down there. I decided it was time to go and turned around to open the door, but the man was already right on top of me. I punched him in the face and managed to get him in a hold, but I heard somebody stomping up the basement steps, and I had to get out of there. I pushed the man to the floor, ran outside, got in my car, and drove off without looking back. I told my manager everything, and he called the cops, but I don't know whatever became of that. My manager gave me a couple days off afterwards. Since then, I am much wiser to the fact that you should never enter a stranger's house. I was out doing a delivery one late night. It was probably the longest drive I have ever taken for a pizza delivery. From the pizza place I worked at, it was a 20-minute drive, which isn't too crazy out where I live. Plus, they ordered 4 large pies, so I figured it was a party and I would get a much bigger tip. Navigating the dirt roads at night was always annoying though. I pulled up to the given address. It was some old, sketchy-looking building literally in the middle of a forest clearing. There were no cars parked anywhere or any lights on. I put my car in park and called my boss. I asked him to reread the address at least 3 times to make sure I typed it in right, but that checked out. I could tell he was in a really bitchy mood, and he told me to at least knock on the door and check it out. He would normally get mad if we took back 1 pie, but I was afraid of what he would do if I brought back 4. I was insanely unnerved, but got out anyway and forced myself to the front door of the building. There was no doorbell, so I just knocked really hard. I heard nothing and didn't really expect to hear anything. I was extremely disappointed, not because nobody answered the door, but because I was realizing that it was all a waste of time and gas. I knocked one more time out of desperation, and then began to hear some kind of rustling noises from inside of the building. I knocked again and yelled that I was the pizza guy. There was silence now. I felt a bit more uncomfortable now than before. But before I could turn around, I noticed something at the window. There was someone looking through the window. I couldn't tell if it was a man or a woman. All I noticed were their eyes. Their eyes were open wider than I knew possible, staring intently at me. I was disturbed enough by this and dropped the pizzas and ran back to my car. The shitty thing wouldn't start until turning the key for the 3rd time. I drove off the grass and back onto the dirt road, but I felt the car rocking about, shaking and bumping. Something wasn't right. I didn't make it far from the building before I started hearing a sharp scraping sound coming from outside. There was so much resistance that I couldn't even drive. The car came to a stop. I got out of the car to check what the hell was wrong. A chill ran up my spine as I began to feel like my heart was constantly skipping beats. My tires had been slashed and had completely fallen off the rim. Not just the front though. All 4 tires were slashed. I realized somebody did this when I was knocking on the door to that building. Instead of running, I got back in the car and locked the doors. I was so close to that building, I could practically see it from where I was, if it weren't for the trees blocking the view. I dialed 911 and explained everything to the operator. She told me the cops would be over as soon as possible and that I need to stay hidden. I asked her if it was advisable to stay in the car or run, and she told me it would be best to stay in the car with the door locked. She asked me to stay on the line with her until the cops arrived. My whole body was shaking. In all directions, there was nothing but dark, seemingly endless forest. I knew it would take forever for the cops to get there. I was not comfortable with sitting in that car so close to whoever did this. The next part, though, is what utterly destroyed me. It still shakes me to this day, and I hope Nobody ever has to experience this kind of fear. As I was scanning all the windows, making sure nobody was outside, I looked in the rearview mirror, and there was the same person I saw at that window. Eyes open wider than ever. I could see now that it was a woman, and I could ever so slightly see a smile begin to spread across her face. I opened my door and full-on sprinted into the woods, not caring how much noise I made. I ran until I was out of breath, which didn't take long, and I hid behind a giant log on the ground. I tried to cover my loud breathing with my hand, as I waited and waited for what felt like hours, until I finally heard sirens in the distance. I gathered up all the stamina I had left to run all the way back in the direction of the dirt road. Eventually, the glowing red and blue lights came into view, and I had never felt better in my life. They were parked in front of my car, investigating with flashlights. I came out yelling at them like a lunatic to help me. I fell to the floor and started to gag, almost throwing up from running so much. They picked me up and began to question me, to which I explained everything to the best of my ability. One of the two cars drove over to the building, and the two officers began to search the building. They came back with nothing except for a couple of spiky objects. These objects were exactly the same as the ones used to slash my tires. The cops guessed that it was some kind of sick, demented couple, being that I saw the woman, but unfortunately they were never found, and that still kills me to this day. I obviously quit my job right after that and started working at a local grocery store. I know that I'll never forget seeing that woman at the back of my car. This happened when I was 15 years old. My best friend Anthony wanted me to come over for the night since his parents would be gone all weekend. I rode my bike over and put it in his backyard before letting myself in through his back door. We played basically every video game he had, from FIFA all the way to Call of Duty, with popcorn and other junk food spilled out all over the floor. As the night progressed, we moved from video games to watching half a movie and getting bored to doing prank calls at close to 10 o'clock. Anthony made a few calls to different pizza places. When it was my turn, I just dialed a few random numbers in hopes to get someone at their house. On, say, my fourth attempt, I finally reached somebody. A guy with a deep and rough voice picked up, answering with a yeah instead of a hello. Anthony's laughing in the background made me stumble with my words mid-sentence, ultimately cracking up into laughter. I had never done a prank call, so I sucked at it. The guy on the other end was silent. I regained a straight face and tried to continue with the call. It went something like this. Sir, would it be alright if I borrowed one of the wheels from your car? What's your name, kid? My name is Bob. Really? You sure it's not Anthony? It hit me like a brick. I looked up at Anthony, whose face was noticeably full of fear. I hung up the phone, not wanting to be on the line with whoever that was for another second. Anthony, who the hell was that? I asked him. I don't know, he told me. Does your caller ID info display your name or something? No, it shows my dad's name. We hopped on the computer and did some research, trying to figure out how it was possible to get someone's name through their phone number. It didn't make sense how he could get Anthony's name so quickly. He was way too young at the time to be on any of those personal information sharing websites. We ended up asking a question on Yahoo Answers, since no one had a similar experience. The question turned up no answers. I suggested he call his dad, but he said he wasn't supposed to have anybody over for the weekend, so he didn't want to call. We planned on sleeping in the living room, so we just resumed watching the movie that we hadn't finished from earlier. Right after the phone call had left my mind, me and Anthony looked at each other when we heard his front storm door opening, and then the doorknob to the front door began to turn. It only was able to turn about halfway before the lock restricted it. Anthony turned off the TV, and I went over to the window to see who it was. I spread the blinds open. There was a tall guy standing outside. He noticed the blinds moving and turned to look at me. I practically threw the blinds back into place. Me and Anthony hid in the kitchen, listening for any more noises. We heard the sound of the gate to the backyard opening, as it was right outside the kitchen window. "God damn it," I said. "I forgot to shut the back door." Anthony urged me to run and shut it. I made it to the hallway leading to his back door and froze. There was a silhouette standing outside the back door. I don't think he noticed me, but he was surely looking into the house. He opened the door and stepped inside. I tiptoed to the kitchen and motioned for Anthony to follow me upstairs. We made it to his room as quietly as possible, pulling the door shut to avoid making any noise. We crawled under his bed. He had cloth covering the bottom of his bed, so you couldn't see anything under it unless you actually moved the cloth. The doors downstairs all opened, each one getting closer to the stairs. Thumps finally began up the stairs, and he was right outside the door now. The door to the room opened. I could hear Anthony's breathing. It was too loud. Footsteps moved over to the closet, and then the closet opened. I could hear the coat hangers being slid around as the fabric of the jackets and coats rubbed against each other. Footsteps moved over to the bed and stopped. I felt like my heart was about to explode out of my chest. Anthony's breathing was too loud. I had to cover his mouth with my hand. Nothing but silence in the room now. We laid still for so long, I almost thought he wasn't even in the room anymore. I moved my hand away from Anthony's mouth and whispered in his ear, "You think we can make a run for it?" He was about to answer when the most disturbing, memory-haunting scream I'd ever heard filled my ears as Anthony was seemingly dragged out from under the bed. I crawled out and saw him struggling with the man. I desperately looked around for anything to use as a weapon. I settled with the screwdriver sitting on his nightstand. I hurried over to the man and drove the screwdriver into his back. He let go of Anthony as he let out a scream of agony, giving us time to get the hell out of the house. Running onto the road would give away our position too easily. It would take too long to make it to his neighbor's house. We dove for the tree line in the woods and took cover behind a bush, watching the house. The back door opened as the man stepped outside, looking around the backyard. He then looked out to the woods. I felt his eyes pass me as he scanned through the tree line. It seemed that it was too dark for him to see us. Then, he turned his head back in our direction. I ducked behind the bush. "Joe, he's coming." "What?" "Dude, get up, we gotta run." He was right. The man was approaching us fast. How could he have seen us? We ran through the woods with the leaves crunching under us, giving away our position. When Anthony tripped over something, I crouched down with him, hoping we had run far enough. Not even 20 seconds later, oncoming footsteps from the direction we were running from came fast. They slowed down only 2 trees away from us, as we lay face down in the leaves. Moments later, the footsteps take off in another direction. We waited until we could no longer hear them, and took off back in the direction of the house. While running, over the sound of leaves crushing and my heavy breathing, I could swear I heard leaves crushing from behind us. We made it back to his backyard, into his house, and this time remembering to shut the back door. We were now able to call the police. Anthony stayed on the line with them, while I patrolled the back windows, making sure nobody was out there. It was so dark though, I couldn't see anything. So I did something that seems stupid today. I turned on his backyard lights, and immediately in the distance, over by the woods, I saw him, standing in front of a big tree. He turned off back into the woods and disappeared out of sight. That was the last time me or Anthony ever saw him. I would be lying if I told you we heard the occasional knocks at our windows or something cliche. No, that was it. 5 years have passed and nothing has happened. Do I wonder if it was somehow linked to the prank call? Maybe. Does it make sense? Not really. But yeah, this was the story of how me and my still best friend Anthony almost died during a break-in. Me and my wife have had our fair share of arguments, but there was this one night that she wouldn't stop bitching over the stupidest shit. It got to the point where I forgot to put the toilet seat down, and she lectured me at the top of her lungs with an ear-piercing voice that I just couldn't take it anymore. I called my buddy Paul up, and he told me I could crash there for the night. I was exhausted, and I didn't need to deal with my crazy wife at the time. Paul had a huge house, which was another thing my wife always yelled at me about, how all my friends have nicer houses than us. We had a few beers and had a bro chat. He suggested I stay there for as long as I needed, but I assured him I'd only stay for one night. I didn't want to be a bother. I slept in one of his guest bedrooms. Surprisingly, he has 3 guest bedrooms, but has only needed to use one of them so far. He never uses the other 2 bedrooms, and only plans on using them for a party or something like that. All 3 guest bedrooms in the house are lined up next to each other, while Paul's bedroom is across the hall. It's a weird setup for sure, but it let me hear strange noises coming from the next room over. I assumed it was Paul doing something in there, but it quickly got annoying, so I decided to just walk over and see what was going on. I tried the doorknob, but it was locked. I cracked the door open to Paul's room and asked him what the noise was. He was already in bed as well. He didn't hear anything. Upon asking why he kept the door locked, he told me he always keeps those 2 doors locked as he keeps some personal belongings in there. I warned him that there was a strange noise coming from the room, and he told me to just go back to sleep, and if I continued to hear it, come back to him. So I did. I went back to bed, and the noises were completely gone now. A half hour passed. I was starting to drift off to sleep at last, when I heard the slightest tap on the wall. It came from the other side, the next room over. It was followed by a faint voice. I jolted up from the bed and ran back to Paul's room. This time, he took me seriously. He got the key to the 2 doors and unlocked the one next to mine. We stepped inside and felt a breeze hit us on the way in. The window was completely open, along with the closet. We dug through the entire room. The bed had marks on it as if someone were on it. The closet was full of empty bags, and his valuable belongings that were in his drawers were gone. Paul suddenly ran out to the hallway. I was confused at first, but I caught on quickly as he was checking the other room. I was right by his side as he unlocked the door to the 3rd guest bedroom, and the first thing we saw was a black figure jumping out the window onto the patio roof. Paul was about to jump out after him, but we instead both ran outside through the back door in hopes to catch him. He was gone already. It's a good thing we didn't catch him though, because what we found in this room was far more disturbing. The white sheets on the bed were stained with blood. The closet had the butcher knife he had been missing sitting on the floor with a few blood spots on it. And of course, all of his valuable belongings were gone. These people, most likely homeless and likely dangerous drug addicts, were living in his home for a little more than a week. He had even mentioned something about how fast his food goes, and yet he's so skinny when we were drinking. That made a lot more sense now. As far as we know, none of them were ever caught. I remember it like it was yesterday. It was my first sleepover, an important part of my childhood. It was my good friend. His name was Jordan. We were 10 years old. He had a huge basement where we could play video games until 1 in the morning and then sleep on the couches. Skipping the teeth brushing like 2 little rebels, we went straight to trying to get some sleep on the couches. I fell asleep with ease. I woke up at some unknown time. I realized the TV was still on, with a blank screen. It was giving off a very dim light, but it was enough to notice something in the far corner of the basement by the stairs. It was some tall object. I didn't know what it was, and I can't really describe how it looked. All I know is it almost reached the ceiling. The sound of the TV turning off and the small amount of light vanishing was almost enough to make me start screaming. I shut my eyes and just laid there motionless. I don't even remember falling back asleep. All I remember is waking up to a sudden and horrid screaming coming from upstairs. It was Jordan's mom. He woke up as well, and we looked at each other before sprinting upstairs to his parents' room. His mom was sitting there crying as his dad was turning the room upside down looking for what she saw. He barged out past us looking for anybody in the house, but there was nobody in the house. No signs of entry or exit. I'm still friends with Jordan today, and the last time I've brought this up, he said his mom doesn't like to talk about it, but she did once admit she saw a tall, dark figure standing by their bedroom door. I'm undoubtedly sure that's what I saw in the basement that night.
Thank you to Cook Unity for sponsoring this video. This video topic is night shift horror stories. Some of you may work the night shift, and preparing your meals for work may be a luxury you don't have in your schedule. Cook Unity is your solution. Cook Unity is the first chef-to-consumer platform, delivering fresh prepared, restaurant-quality food from award-winning chefs straight to your door every week. Cook Unity connects a diverse group of talented chefs that cook delicious, inventive meals fresh every day in regional micro-kitchens, not warehouse production facilities. These chefs offer a wide range of meals with over 7 different dietary preference filters, including vegan, paleo, and gluten-free options. The subscription is super flexible and you can pause, skip weeks, or cancel at any time. One of the meals I received was adobo chicken and chorizo paella with saffron aioli, made by Chef Jose Garces, and it's been my favorite so far. Meals are delivered fully cooked, so all you have to do is heat them up. No more cleanup or meal prepping. Go to cookunity.com/nightmare50 or click the link in the description and use my code nightmare50 to get 50% off your first order of Cook Unity meals to try them out for yourself. I regrettably used to work at a hotel in our town. Our town had gotten hit by a hurricane a few months back, and a lot of houses were badly damaged, so a lot of people vacated the place. The hotel is about a 20-minute walk from my house. The town and hotel name I'll leave out of this, as I really just don't want anything traced back to me. The hotel was a very standard bed and breakfast type place. You know, where they serve wet scrambled eggs, frozen sausages, and assorted cereals. The hotel had a busy month after the hurricane, as some people were out of their houses due to damages, but after a while, things quieted down, if anything, quieter than before the hurricane. I always worked nights, from 6 p.m. to 2 a.m. Then someone would relieve me at 2 a.m. and they'd work till 10 or 11 a.m. I could always see how many people were checked into the hotel, and at the time it was only maybe 9 rooms, which wasn't a lot at all. I could go the whole night sometimes without seeing anyone. There was a back break room for employees with a coffee machine, fridge, table, and a couple sofa-type chairs. The employee bathroom was also back here. At night, I spent most of my time back here. There was a bell at the front desk that people would ring if they needed anything. I was in the back when I heard a deep voice from the lobby saying hello repeatedly. I got up and went through the door leading to behind the counter and saw a man on the other side of the glass. There was a glass barrier with an opening underneath about 10 inches high. He said he needed towels. I grabbed him a couple extra towels and slid them under the glass for him. He grabbed them rather aggressively, shot me this weird look, then walked to the room's hallway. I stayed in the lobby now, sitting in the rolling chair by the monitors, and I just watched that man on the camera walk down the hallway. He was looking around weirdly. Then he started rubbing the towels on his face. I said out loud, "What in the world?" Then he got in the elevator. So I went back to the break room. It was maybe 10 minutes later when I heard a voice again from the lobby. It was the same voice. I walked back out and that man was standing on the other side again. He said very loudly, "My key card is broken." I asked what his room number was. He said it was something random like 2C, something with a letter in it. Our hotel room strictly had numbers, no letters, so I knew this man was lying. I told him, "Sir, our rooms don't have letters. Are you sure you're staying here?" His reaction was not something I was expecting, nor was it something I wish I ever had to be victim to. He threw the towels on the floor, started smiling, slightly tilting his head as he got closer to the glass. When his face was practically pressed up on the glass, he said, "I'm going to kill you," still with a smile on his face. Then he said it again, louder, and again. Each time he said it, it got louder until it was almost a scream. I screamed back at him, "I'm calling the police." And I did. I picked up the phone and showed him as I dialed 911. He kept his disturbing smile as he now started mocking me calling the police. As I spoke to the dispatcher on the phone, explaining very loudly what was happening in front of my face, the sick man laughed and headed for the door in a slow walk. I told the dispatcher he was leaving, and when he was gone through the doors and out of sight, I said he was gone. She asked me if I still wanted an officer to show up, and I said no, it's alright. So the next couple hours of my shift went slow. I decided, for obvious reasons, to hang around in the lobby now instead of the break room. There was one guest who checked in during this time. At around 2 a.m., my relief came. I clocked out and was free to go home. I walked outside to the parking lot. It was cold out. I remember wishing I brought my coat. I walked with my hands in the pockets of my light jacket and my hood up. Then I heard a voice in the parking lot. I turned around. There was a line of bushes that covered the first floor windows of the hotel. It came from the bushes. I don't know what the voice said. I didn't care. I walked faster now. Once I got out of the parking lot, I was on a main road for a brief minute, but there were no cars on the road in this quiet town at this hour. After a minute, I turned left down a residential street that would eventually turn onto my block. It was dead silent out, not even the sound of any distant traffic, just the sound of my shoes hitting the pavement, and then the sound of someone else's shoes hitting the pavement behind me. Only it was the sound of someone running as if on their tiptoes trying to be quiet. By the time I turned around, they stopped. There was a car right behind me, and I almost knew that there was someone hiding behind it. I heard laughing, and then a familiar voice saying quietly, "I'm going to kill you, bitch." Without even seeing him, I knew it was that man. I looked around, planning out my next move. I couldn't outrun a man, let alone wearing my work shoes. I looked at the nearest house. It had an upstairs light on. Someone was awake. I would go run and ring the doorbell for help. I looked back at the car, and I saw him. That man, peeking his eyes out from behind the car as he inched around it to the front. When he got to the hood, the rest of his face and upper body were exposed, and I could see his disgusting, crazy smile again. I ran for the house, screaming, "Help me." I made it to the front door and rang the bell at least 3 times, and that's when the man grabbed me and started choking me, whispering in my ear, "Die, bitch." In that moment, I thought my life was flashing before my eyes. And then an angel in the form of a man opened the front door to the house and screamed "hey" at the man choking me. The man's grip was released from my neck and I fell to the floor. I never turned to watch the man run away, but the man from the house helped me up and brought me inside. He gave me water and called the police for me, and I explained the whole story to the police. They collected the CCTV footage of the man from the hotel and put feelers out to track him. I was called into the police station when they did a lineup of people who looked similar to the man on the CCTV footage, and I was asked to point out which man I thought was him. I looked at all 5 of them for like 5 minutes, and I ultimately said it wasn't any of them. I don't know if the pressure and nerves got to me, but in the moment, I truly didn't recognize him to be in that lineup. I hope to this day I didn't make a mistake and let that man roam free. I work in the pro department of a home improvement company. I work the closing shift with another cashier, who I'll call Nicole. Nicole is a really kind but quite timid cashier. She's also very pretty, so she has a lot of contractors hit on her. It's usually not that worrisome though. A few compliments, maybe a dinner invite, which she'd politely decline. I would probably ask her out as well, if it wasn't for one detail. Nicole does have a girlfriend, so being hit on by guys on a daily basis makes her rather uncomfortable. When we first met, I told her she ought to tell those guys about being gay, but she kept saying it wasn't any of their business, so she kept that part to herself. Nicole has become my best friend, and having another cashier there with you keeps things from getting lonely. We even cover for each other's lunch breaks. One day when I came back from lunch, Nicole started telling me about this rather creepy guy who was flirting with her. She said she politely turned him down, saying she was with someone already, and while he didn't seem happy, he did leave. I shrugged it off as nothing more than the usual horny guy and laughed it off. But later that day, the man came back. Nicole wasn't there, as she had left to help a customer find some lumber, so it was just me. He looked rather normal, probably handsome to most women, but he acted off. After looking around the area, I asked him if I could help him with anything. "I'm here to see Nicole," he told me. I asked him how he knew her, and he said he had come in earlier and asked her out, to which she said yes, so he had come back in to pick her up. I told him she had left for the day, a usual lie everyone tells to cover for their friends. His smile went away as he started looking annoyed. He said he wanted to speak to Nicole and ask her out again, which contradicted what he had just told me about accepting his previous invite. I told him he could not do that, which caused him to cross his arms and ask me why not. I'm not the best liar when it comes to making up excuses on the spot. However, I didn't want to tell him Nicole was gay if she didn't want him to know it, so I just blurted out that Nicole was my fiancée. His annoyed look went to confusion as he asked me how someone as pretty as she is could go out with someone like me. I'm not a Jason Momoa or anything, but I don't think I'm that bad looking. I told him it didn't matter and that her and I were getting married in a couple months, so he needed to back off. He gave me a death look, but didn't say anything. After an awkward silence, he left. After Nicole had gotten back, I told her what went down. She asked me to describe him, and after I told her what he looked like, she said that was the same guy who came in before. She was a bit creeped out by what went down, but she found the fiancé excuse rather funny. She even stated she'd rather be engaged to me than go out with him, which I'm guessing was a compliment. A couple of weeks went by, and we had all but forgotten about the man at this point. But one night, after it had gotten dark, Nicole and I were getting the trash together so we could close down the registers and go home. Just then, we hear a bang at the door, causing both of us to nearly jump out of our skins. It was the guy again. He had a wild look in his eyes as he kept his face pressed against the glass. "We're closed," I tell him. But he insists he needs to come in. Nicole yells again to tell him she's not interested, and for him to go away and leave her alone. But he yells that he's not here for her. He's here for me. He then says that if he can, quote-unquote, take out her husband, then she'd be all his. Based on that, he wanted to kill me. I tell Nicole to run to the manager's office and call the police, and I'll stay here and watch him. I won't lie though, I was pretty afraid to be in that tiny little area if the guy is able to get in. He wasn't the biggest guy, but he could have had a weapon on him. Plus, the store doesn't allow us to have self-defense items on us, so I was on my own here. The guy then started ramming the sliding doors like he was crazy. The doors were rattling, and I could have sworn we're gonna come off its base. Just then, Nicole comes running back around the corner with a 2x4 in her hand, yelling that the cops are on their way. Finally, the man decided to leave. The closing manager met the officers when they came, and he took them to review the cameras. Thankfully, the man was caught and arrested, but Nicole nor I felt safe working there any longer. We're still friends and even attend the same college together, but we do have separate jobs now while we pay our way through classes. I'm glad she was there to help me with the rogue man, as I hate to imagine what he might have done to me, or worse, what he might have done to her. She says she's glad I was there for her as well, as having a guy around tends to make men like him less confident in what they might try. It was a wake-up call for me as to how dangerous it can be for some girls when an interested guy just doesn't want to take no for an answer. So this happened a little over 2 years ago now, and I wanted to share it somewhere just to look back on it one day and never forget the lesson I learned. It was 2016 and I had just started a new job at a motel. It was low pay, but I needed an office job. One of my friends, Michael, got me this job. For a few days, I did training with the owner in the mornings. For 2 nights, Michael trained me. Our job was the 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. shift. Nothing exciting, checking guests in and doing paperwork. My boss, or the owner, went away with his wife on vacation for a week, which is attributed to the swift training I had to endure. So it was my first night alone on the night shift. There was a monitor with security cameras around the motel's property, and large glass windows all around the office building with a glass door. There was no night window like most motels have. It was fairly early in the night, at about 1 a.m. I was just doing my normal check-in paperwork. That's when a man walks in and asks if we have any rooms available. Usually if someone's sketchy, my boss has me lie and say no, but he seemed normal at the moment. Without hesitation, I said, "Yes, of course, just for one?" And he replies, "Yes." So I begin creating the reservation on the computer when I notice he starts swatting the air and making spitting noises, as if he's being surrounded by flies. I try to ignore it. As far as I'm concerned, it wasn't my business. So I try to check him into the room as quickly as possible. I give him his key and he's on his way. At this point in time, I could be described as very timid. I had a lot going on in my personal life, so I hope you can all understand my reaction to what happens next. The man comes back from his room and slams his hand on the glass door, causing me to jump. Absolutely frightened, I look up to see him just staring at me. He cracks the door and puts his head through and says I can't get into my room. Why won't you let me into my room? And my only defense is trying to be helpful. So I replied, maybe there's something wrong with your key. Let me give you another one. The look he had in his eyes was inexplainable. I felt like I was in absolute danger. I handed him his new key and he went back to his room. I tried texting Michael because he's the one who trained me, though it was in the middle of the night and he was asleep. I needed some guidance. With no reply from Michael, I noticed the man trudging down the stairs to come back. I go into absolute panic mode. I run into the back office and lock the door, and I pull out my pocket knife. It's important to keep protection when working at night. I hear the man in the office yelling, "Hello, hello, why won't you let me into my room? Do you not like me?" Me being an absolute idiot and not standing my ground and just calling the police when I'm feeling scared, I decided to take the situation on alone. I reply, "I'm just on the phone, I'll be right out." I then start calling Michael over and over for help. No answer. I decided to take a few breaths and then step out of the office. The man was not there. He was in the bathroom. I start hearing him talking to himself, angrily saying, "Kill her, kill her." My heart sank. Still being an idiot and not calling the police, he comes out and I say, "Your key was broken, I'm sorry. Let me escort you to your room." He agrees, thankfully. I was wearing a long-sleeved sweater, so with my arms down, I was able to hide my knife in my hand while holding it. I begin to walk outside, and he seemed insistent to walk behind me. We begin making our way to the staircase and up towards his room. I was sweating from how nervous I was, continuously looking behind me to make sure he wasn't going to make a move. He stops at a room, and I stop at his room a few doors down. I smile and say, "Oh, that's the wrong room. This is your room," as it clearly said on the door. This whole time he was going to someone else's room and trying to open the door. After letting him into his room, I quickly ran back to the office and locked the door, and I found out there was a lone woman staying in the other room he was trying to get into. The next guest I checked in was a police officer from a few towns over. I felt bad for confiding in him about the guy, but he seemed willing to keep an eye and ear out. The next night, the man came back, but I had the doors locked and told him we're all booked up. I explained to my boss what happened when he got back from vacation. However, he didn't take it very seriously. I continued to work there on the night shift for the next year, where many other strange encounters have happened, but this was one of the worst. So, I've been a pizza delivery guy for a decent amount of time, and I usually get stuck with a crappy shift of 4 p.m. to 4 a.m. I live in a pretty small city out in the boonies, so there's only like one murder per year in our area. Well, last month there were 3 back-to-back murders, and we as drivers keep on that stuff. But hey, we average out pretty good for just driving around the city all night, so it wasn't anything to get too worked up about. Anyway, it was probably around 1 a.m., and there was only me, another driver, a cook, and our manager who's in his mid-20s, and he's really cool and understanding because he had been a driver in his teens. We were all finished with all the cleaning and stuff like that because it was an unusually slow night that night. Then we finally got an order. I was the so-called lucky one to get to take this delivery down the dirt road in the middle of nowhere. I personally had never delivered to that area, but it was about 10 miles away from where I lived, so I knew there was only going to be about 5 houses on that lonely 4 miles of road. I put the pizzas in my car and started on my drive. I had just put in 2 12-inch subwoofers in the back of my '99 Honda Accord to complete my white trash look, but they weren't secured in there, and being an unkept dirt road, I was driving pretty slow. My GPS told me I had arrived, but it was about a mile off, so I turned down the subs and pulled up to what I believed to be the house. Our boss has a thing about never pulling up in the driveway no matter how much of a walk it is. And this was one of those times that I thought I'd actually do what he says. I grabbed the pizza and receipt and walked up to the door. It was a long driveway, and what sucked was they had the audacity to leave all the outside and inside lights off to the house. Probably just watching a movie, I thought to myself, as it wasn't this unusual this time of night. I got up to the door and knocked. Nothing. Great, a 10-mile drive here for nothing. I knocked again and again. I started to get uncomfortable, and that's when I heard the quiet sound of someone or something walking. It was coming from around the side of the house that I couldn't see. I was getting a bit unnerved and decided this was a great time to start heading back to my car. I didn't want to go back empty-handed though, and when I got to the safety of my car, I decided to ring up the person and see if they were just asleep. I was probably just imagining the footsteps or mistaking them for the creaking of the old house. No answer. I decided to balls up and head over to the door one last time for one final knock. So I put my phone on flashlight mode and walked up to the door. One more knock and nothing. This time I heard the footsteps again, and I turned my light and saw a man wearing some sort of werewolf mask. I bolted to my car with him closely on my heels, but it was obvious that he wasn't the fastest man out there, and I easily made it to the car with time to spare. I threw the pizza in the car and floored it, almost hitting the man with my car. I called the police, and it turned out that while yes, this call had been made from inside their house, the actual residents were out of town. This was only a few days ago, and they haven't found the guy. I included a picture of the house for all to see. I was parked by the red, and the yellow indicates where the guy was. I still wonder if this man was part of the murders in our quiet little town. But whoever that was, they probably weren't in it for the pizza. On a lazy Friday night when I had the house to myself, I was chilling in the living room with the lights off, watching movie after movie. It was past like 10, and I had a craving for pizza, so I ordered a pie from the local late-night pizza place. It was a rainy night, part of the reason why I chose to just stay in and watch movies. Ironically, I was watching some scary movie at the moment, and at some point during that, I heard loud steps coming up the front stoop outside. I waited for a knock or the doorbell, but when I didn't hear either, I muted the TV out of curiosity. I then went to the front door and quietly lifted the slider above the peephole to look out at who could be on the porch. I was expecting to see the pizza guy, but at first all I thought I saw was black. It took me a few moments to realize I was looking back at someone's eye, pressed up on the other side of the peephole. I basically leaped back from being startled. I called through the door asking if it was the pizza guy. A deep man's voice called back, "Yes, it is." But something wasn't right. I looked through the peephole again, and now it seemed like the man on the other side was covering it with his hand or something. I didn't know what to do, other than yell, "Why are you covering the peephole?" He didn't respond to that. Instead, he just knocked on the door. I yelled at him to please leave, and I walked away from the door back to the living room. A few moments later, the doorbell rang, and I heard the same deep voice yell, "Pizza, open up." I once again got up and went to check through the peephole, but he was still covering it. I shouted at him again to please leave or I'd be calling the police. Now I turned off the TV to allow for total darkness in the house. All I could hear for a while was the sound of the pouring rain outside. When I went back to the front door to look through the peephole once again, now I was able to see through it. The man was no longer on the stoop. I called the pizza place and asked the guy who picked up the phone if he could check if the delivery driver had arrived to my house yet. I of course explained what was going on and why I was asking for that. He said he'd give the driver a call and then call me back, so I hung up and waited like 2 minutes. And the guy called me back to tell me that the driver had not yet arrived to my house, and he suggested that I call the police. He also said the driver would call me when he arrives. I thanked him and hung up the phone. Next thing I remember is hearing knocks from the backyard door. I felt like this couldn't be happening. I actually felt sick. I crept to the back door, which has a pull-down blind which covers the glass for privacy. It was currently pulled down. This next part I still don't understand. Even though I crept quietly to the back door, as soon as I got there, that same familiar voice said, "I see you there, open the door." Then he tried opening it himself, but thank God it was locked. Once again, I yelled I'm calling the cops if he didn't leave. By luck of good timing, my phone began to ring, and it was the real pizza guy calling to say he was here. I told him to please come to the front door quickly. I opened the front door for him and let him in. He asked if I needed help, and I begged him to stay with me until the police would show up. And he did me that favor. Police showed up within 10 minutes. Having someone there waiting with me made me feel a lot better. There weren't any other disturbances from that man outside from the time the pizza guy got there to the time the police left. I went straight to sleep after that. I went so far as to pushing my dresser in front of my door, just as a desperate act of feeling safe. Thank God that man left for good. It was a little past 9 p.m. on a Saturday 3 years ago, back when I was delivering pizzas for this pizza place called Gino's. It was my last delivery of the night, my last delivery at that place ever, actually. Not because my shift was ending, but for reasons you're about to find out. I was supposed to deliver one regular pizza to this house around 10 minutes from the restaurant. I got there relatively quickly because I drive fast. It was a gated property, so I had to park on the street and walk through the gate up the decently long pathway to the front door. There, I rang the bell and waited. No one answered after a minute, so I rang it again. I knew the doorbell was working because I heard the ringing from outside. Finally, the lights in a room next to the front door turned on, so I naturally looked up to the window. And there were two people looking out the window at me. Extremely off-putting and unnerving. As I looked back at them, the front door opened, and a man wearing some pig mask opened the door. I couldn't see his face, but he sounded very joyous for the arrival of the pizza. He apologized for their costumes and said they were having a role-playing party. He told me to come in for a second since it was cold and that he'd go fetch his wallet. So I stepped into the house and he shut the door behind me. Then he disappeared into another room. I stepped forward a few feet to get a view into the adjacent room, and the two people I saw standing at the window moments before were gone. The man called me into another lit-up room nearby. I didn't feel too comfortable, to be completely honest. The whole mask thing was insanely weird, and the two creepy people watching me at the window. Still holding the pizza box, I walked to the other room. As I passed the living room into the room next to it, I was just speechless as to what I saw. There were 6 chairs covered in white sheets arranged in a circle. 4 of them were being sat on by other people wearing bizarre plastic animal masks. The guy in the pig mask who opened the door said, "Come in, it'll just be a moment." I asked, "What are you guys role-playing exactly?" All 5 of them erupted into this creepy laughter, making me even more uncomfortable. The man in the pig mask told me to sit in one of the empty chairs. I looked at him without saying a word. Then I saw someone else creepily entering the room, kind of half hiding behind a wall opposite me. He was wearing a frog mask. I said, "You can just have the pizza," as I started to back away. There was no more laughter, no verbal response. 2 of the people in chairs got up and started moving towards me, so I did the only thing I could think to, and I threw the pizza box as hard as I could at them into the room and ran for the front door, and then I sprinted to my car. And yes, I was chased outside. One of them tried breaking my passenger side window as I hightailed it out of there. I floored it down the street and went back to the pizzeria, where I told my boss what happened, that I was basically robbed, if not about to be kidnapped or worse. He didn't even want to call the cops, and with that, I quit that job that night. Against my better judgment, I got another pizza delivery job a few months later, but nothing even remotely close to something this strange ever happened again. Back in high school, my friends and I had a hangout spot like no other. It was this baseball field behind the abandoned grade school. We always thought that we'd get there one day and there'd be a construction crew plowing the whole place down, but they never came. At least not when we were kids. We all thought it was because our town was just too damn poor to do it, which is probably true. But it's not like it's a good real estate location either. It was built right along the woods, far away from most of the town. It was essentially in the middle of nowhere, just like the rest of our town. The reason we enjoyed going there so much was because no one else did. People would occasionally break into the school and do a little graffiti here and there. Sometimes the cops would show up, but they never came to the baseball field. It was a safe haven for the friend group, and that was really important because a lot of my friends didn't exactly have the best home lives, especially one of them, Tim. His mom would always call the cops on him for whatever reason she could possibly conjure up that day. Yet when we were at the field, there was nothing they could do. We spent a lot of summer nights sitting along the rusted out bleachers, smoking and talking about God knows what to pass the time. I loved that place. We all did. Although, even before it happened, there was this one thing that always creeped me out about the place. There was an old lamplight right along the bleachers that somehow still worked. The town must have forgotten about that too. It was one of those lights that emitted an orange hue, and since it was the only light there, we'd be shrouded in it. It didn't really light up a whole lot either. Whenever I'd get too high, I'd look off into the surrounding woods that was masked in pure darkness. I'd think about how someone or something could easily see us and we'd have no idea. It'd really get on my nerves. But then eventually someone would tell a joke or get my attention, and I'd forget about that thought. For a little bit at least. I wonder how many times they watched us. I'll never know. During the beginning of summer, one night my friend Johnny and I were going up to the field. I must have left before he did, because by the time I got there, his car was nowhere to be seen. I decided to get a head start and go off to the field alone. This was pretty frowned upon in our group. Even though we all liked to think we were tough, walking through a bit of woods alone at night wasn't in our repertoire. I always kind of enjoyed the thrill though. I went on past the school and through the woods to reach the field. I waited another 10 minutes or so, but he hadn't shown up, so I started to smoke. Another 30 minutes passed and nothing. At this point, the thrill had worn off completely. I decided to walk back to my car. I ended up jogging because of how uncomfortable I felt. I texted him a couple of times, yet he never answered, so I spent another 10 minutes in my car and then just drove home. When I woke up, I saw that he never texted back. I was a little pissed off, but I didn't think much of it. Until later in the day, when my mom asked me if I'd seen Johnny recently. I hit up all our friends, but they knew as much as me. The last time we all saw him was when we were at the field 2 nights ago. A day passed, then another. Soon enough, everyone in town knew. Search parties started running rampant. My friends and I even went on a few ourselves, but we never found him. No one did. To this day, the body was never recovered. At the time, I tried to make myself believe that he simply ran away. He was an adventurous kid. He'd talk about wanting to travel the world all the time. How this town made him feel claustrophobic. But deep down, I knew that he wouldn't leave like that. He would have at least left us a note. Probably on the bleachers where no one else would find it. After about a month, I went back to the field. This time, I went alone. I was so angry at the world that I didn't care if I got mauled by some sort of animals lingering in the woods. But just as I got to the end of the woods path, I noticed there were people on the bleachers. For a second, I thought it was just my friends, considering we had never seen anyone else there before. But they weren't. I never saw these people before in my life. 3 of them were on the bleachers, sitting completely motionless. They looked like statues, but they weren't the ones that creeped me out. There was another. He was dancing and skipping around. It made me uncomfortable at how happy he was, but it wasn't an ordinary type of happiness. At the time, I figured he must have been on Molly. Now I just think he's a damn psycho. Worst of all, he looked familiar. I couldn't pinpoint him though. It's like seeing an unfamiliar face in a dream. I knew that I had seen him before, but I just had no idea where. I couldn't handle it. It was just so damn strange. So I tried to get out of there as quietly and quickly as I could. Luckily, they didn't follow. At least, I don't think they did. When I got back to my car, my first thought was to hightail it out of there, but I didn't follow that instinct. Instead, I drove around the school lot. In the back corner of the parking lot, I saw a car. I knew the model. It was the same one Johnny drove, but as I spotted it, the lights turned on. I abruptly reversed and got the hell out of there. As summer went on, I couldn't get them out of my head. I told all of my friends about it, and they agreed it was weird, but they didn't think much of it. I even stopped going to the field because of them. On a late July day, I was feeling pretty nostalgic and sad thinking about Johnny. I decided to look at the yearbook to catch up on some memories. That's when I found him. One of the janitors was in the background of a sports picture. As soon as I turned the page, I knew it was him. Same face and hair. It was the dancing man. It had to be. I couldn't believe it. I told all my friends about it, but they didn't know what to do. Eventually, I went to the cops. I'm pretty sure they thought I was crazy, but they still did do a background check on the guy. At least that's what they told me. They couldn't find a thing. Even his social security card didn't lead anywhere. I attempted to do some research myself, but I couldn't find a thing. The man was a damn ghost. Near the end of the summer, I went back to the field with a few of my friends. I couldn't get the feeling that I was being watched out of my head. Every time I looked into the abyss of the woods, I felt afraid. I longed for the feeling that I once had there, but I knew it wasn't coming back. This place was no longer a home to me. When I left that night, I never came back. Near the end of the summer, I was at a Dunkin' Donuts. It was early in the morning, so I was pretty groggy, until I saw him. The dancing man, the janitor. It looked exactly like him. At first, I thought my mind was just playing tricks on me, but the longer I looked, the more convinced I became. Then he saw me and smiled. He hurried out of the store and I followed him, but one of his buddies was parked curbside at the exit. He rushed in there and sped away before I could get to him, but what I saw horrified me more than anything else. The license plate of the car they were driving was the same as Johnny's. I knew it because he had a unique plate, 4PAC207. It was the same car I had seen a month before. Then it clicked. That was Johnny's car. They got a paint job, so I didn't notice back then, but I should have. I still beat myself up because of it. I never saw him again, or the car. Nowadays, it's all just a memory, one that I wish I could forget. Rest in peace, Johnny. It was the summer of 2024, and my three buddies, Jake, Sam, and Marcus and I were desperate for a break from our internship at the Kennedy Space Center. We'd been buried in rocket data for weeks, but as star geeks, we craved a night under a pristine sky. We pored over light pollution maps and Google Maps, zeroing in on a remote clearing deep in Tate's Hell State Forest, a swampy, desolate stretch of Florida's panhandle. The name came from an old legend about Sebe Tate, a settler who vanished in the swamp in the 1800s, supposedly cursed. We brushed it off. Ghost stories were for kids. We just wanted stars. Our safe haven was an Airbnb, a cozy cabin near Apalachicola, about 30 miles from the forest's edge. After work that Friday, we piled into my Tesla Model Y and Marcus's Mustang, loaded with blankets, snacks, and a telescope. No camping gear since we'd been sleeping back at the cabin. The 7-hour drive from the Space Center was grueling, and we hit the Airbnb late, dropping our bags and grabbing a quick snack before heading back out again. The final stretch into Tate's Hell was brutal. Narrow dirt trails twisting through dense pines and murky wetlands, and the air thick with cicadas and the occasional splash of something in the water. With no cell service, we used walkie-talkies to stay connected between cars, with their crackles cutting through the dark. Around 2 a.m., we reached the clearing, tired and buzzing. The sky was unreal. The stars were blazing like they were close enough to grab. We spread out blankets, set up the telescope, and dove in. 15 minutes later, Sam's voice hissed over the walkie-talkie from the Mustang. He said,
"Yo, you see that? Headlights."
My gut twisted. We turned, and a faint glow crept along the trail we'd driven in on. Out here, 40 miles from the nearest town, at 2 a.m. in a massive forest, Nobody's just passing by. Whoever was out there was trouble. Jake, in the Tesla with me, grabbed his walkie-talkie. Flash them, see what they do. I flicked the Tesla's headlights. 3 sharp bursts. An old pickup truck, rusted and battered, stopped about 100 yards off. No honk or wave or anything. Then we saw them, the shadowy figures stepping out. 2 or 3, hard to tell in the glare. They just stood there staring, and that's when we heard faint voices, low and garbled, drifting through the swamp. Whispers we couldn't make out.
This is messed up.
Marcus crackled over the radio. Sam sounded spooked.
Those voices. Nobody's out here at 2 a.m. for anything good.
I swung my flashlight, but the beam didn't reach, catching only shadows. Those whispers kept going, soft and sinister, making my skin crawl. Jake tried to stay cool. Maybe locals, but let's move, he said. We agreed over the walkie-talkies to find another spot, but we set a rule. If those lights showed up again, we were racing back to the Airbnb's safety. We turned off the main trail. Anyone following us was after us. We sped a mile down a side trail, found another clearing, and set up fast. Just blankets and nerves. 5 minutes in, Marcus's voice cut through the walkie-talkie. It sounded urgent.
They're back,
he said. My heart sank. Those same headlights sliced through the dark, much closer now. Then came a gut punch, an engine rev, like they were doing it as a threat. Sam said, "Get us out now." We scrambled into the cars, Jake and I in the Tesla, Marcus and Sam in the Mustang. I floored it, with the Tesla jolting over roots and branches underneath scraping like claws. Those headlights stuck to us, high beams blinding in my rearview mirror. Jake was on the walkie-talkie saying, "Marcus, you good?" Marcus replied back,
"Barely, they're right there."
We were 40 miles from help, just 4 young, basically defenseless interns. At 2 a.m. in a place called Tate's Hell, you don't meet good people. I pushed the Tesla to its limits with Marcus close in the Mustang. The trail veered in one direction, and for a second, as we turned, the headlights of the truck tailing us vanished. I prayed we'd lost them, but shortly after, they were back. Like they were toying with us, knowing we were trapped. We hit a fork, and I swerved left, hoping it led to the main road. The truck followed. Finally, after much more panic and stress, the dirt turned to pavement, and a faded highway sign appeared ahead. I glanced back, expecting those headlights, but they were gone. Marcus's Mustang pulled up beside us, and we stopped on the shoulder, panting, just staring into the dark. All we heard in the forest now was just crickets and the crackle of our walkie-talkies. The drive back to the Airbnb was dead silent. We stumbled into the cabin, locking the door, but even that safe haven felt unsafe after what we'd faced. Who were they? We considered some possibilities, like poachers or druggies running something shady, or something tied to those voices in the old tales of Tate's Hell. At 2 a.m. in a place like that, nobody's out for a good time. The way they watched us, the way they chased us without even rushing, it wasn't a prank. It felt like they wanted us to be afraid. We never went back. We don't talk about it. Not at the Space Center, not anywhere. But when I'm driving those lonely Florida roads at night, I think just a little part of me has permanently become more hyper-aware. In December 2023, I took a 3-week-long vacation to Japan. My family owns a hotel near the small mountain town of Kaga Onsen in the west of Japan. It was a large Japanese inn, also known as ryokan, built into the side of the hill next to the Daishoji River. The area surrounding the hotel was inhabited for at least 2 millennia, and it was considered a sacred place. My father had told me a long while back that when the hotel was being constructed, the builders had found a couple of old stone blocks and pillars at the site. Apparently, there was some sort of shrine that had been built there around the 9th century. The last time I stayed in that hotel was over 15 years ago, so I was kind of interested in reliving the experience of staying there. As well as that, I really like exploring, and remembering the story that my father told me, I decided to go and do some off-trail hiking in the forest below the hotel, hopefully finding any traces of the ancient ruins which my father mentioned. As soon as I arrived at the nearby city of Kanazawa, I got a car at the rental next to the train station and drove up to the hotel. It was snowing heavily, and traffic was terrible. The ride was supposed to take around an hour, but instead it took 2 hours. I arrived at the hotel around 8, and I let myself in. The hotel was basically vacant in December, and tourists don't usually go to this part of Japan in the winter. There was no staff at all in the hotel. I found myself being the only person in the hotel. The feeling was quite surreal, just being alone in such a building in the middle of nowhere. I grabbed one of the keys behind the counter, let myself into one of the suites, and slept there for the night. The next day, I went into the forest below the hotel. The snow was quite deep, up to my ankles, and trudging down rough terrain with boots was absolute hell. I must have walked far enough into the forest to lose my sense of direction. I checked my phone, but there was no signal at all. I had been walking for around an hour and didn't know where I was. I was surrounded by trees on all sides, and directly in front of me was a large hill. I thought it would be good if I climbed to the summit so I could get a better vantage point to possibly locate any form of civilization. The ascent was very tough, the sides of the hill being quite steep and rocky. However, off to the left, I noticed what looked like the remnants of a path. I slowly traversed my way towards the path. It was a dirt path that wound its way up towards the summit of the hill. The path was slightly overgrown with dead branches blocking the way up, but soon enough, I managed to reach my way to the top. However, I noticed that soon enough, the path was gone. It just ended. I looked around the hill and noticed a small cavity in the hillside above the path, hidden in the vegetation, maybe 5 meters away from the path. I climbed up and found myself standing in front of the entrance to a small cave. A bit of mud had washed into the cave, but the opening was large enough for me to fit my body through. I had a small flashlight on me, and I shone it into the opening. I could see a small alcove in front of me, with another small opening to the left. As I entered the cave, a certain smell hit me. I don't know how to explain it, but the best way to describe it is that it smelled like an animal at the zoo. The alcove in front of me was bare, except for a large rectangular block of stone placed right in the middle. As I walked deeper into the cave, I found myself in a large stone chamber. There were 2 other side tunnels that ran from this chamber, but I didn't explore them. There was yet another rectangular stone block, but this time it was on the far side of the chamber and looked to be hollow. I got up close to the block, and to my utter shock, there looked to be human bones inside the block. Surrounding the bones was a long piece of steel and a bunch of old bronze coins, the ones with a square hole in the center. I just stood there in a mix of utter shock and disbelief. I reached down and picked up one of the coins. I don't know why I did it, just instinct, I guess. The coin was old and corroded, but some characteristics were visible on it. Before I could examine it closely, I heard a loud crash come from deep within one of the side tunnels. I quickly pointed my flashlight towards the origin of the sound. The animalistic scent got stronger, making the air feel toxic. I, for some reason, grabbed the long piece of steel resting amongst the bones and held it in front of me with one hand as a weapon. The light of my flashlight made it easier for me to see that the long piece of steel looked to be the remnants of a long blade. I started backing away towards the entrance. The smell was different this time. I could smell smoke under that overwhelming stench. I could hear a rhythmic thumping originating from deep within the tunnel. It sounded like someone banging on a drum. That's the point where I lost it. I ran out of the cave, back out towards the opening. As I ran out, I swear that I felt the entire cave vibrate and shake. I jumped out of the entrance onto the slope below and tumbled onto the snowy ground. I had dropped the blade on the snowy ground, but I didn't care to pick it up. I kept on running and running down the slope, crashing through dead twigs and branches. I ran and ran until I heard the sound of a car driving past in the distance. I soon found myself on the side of the road. I let out a sigh of relief as I collapsed by the side of the road. I managed to flag down a passing car. The driver was first reluctant to let me in, but after seeing how distressed I was, he did. Through some conversation with the driver, I found out that I was quite far from the hotel, around 4 miles. Soon enough, I arrived back at the hotel. I went back to my room, packed up everything, and got in my car. I didn't feel safe being the only person in the hotel. I drove back to Kanazawa, where I stayed for the night. This story has a follow-up though. When the hotel was up and running in February, I got a text from my father. He told me that someone had broken into the hotel through one of the first floor windows. Surprisingly, nothing was damaged or stolen, except for the front door of my room, which was smashed wide open with some sort of blunt metal object. I don't know if this is connected to my experience, but I am definitely not going to be staying at that hotel, ever. I've been with my company now for a good amount of time. I'd say probably about 6 years now. Thanks to the amount of time I've put in, I have seniority over the other associates. Not to mention, I have a lot more training and credentials under my belt than they do. The company recently picked up a new contract for some kind of big government office building. Where it's located is rather strange for it to be a government office building. I won't get into exact locations, but to give you an idea of what the area it's located in looks like, and what makes it so strange, is that it's located in damn near the middle of nowhere. It's a giant 6-story building surrounded by a giant parking lot. The parking lot is surrounded by a metal fence that's about 10 feet tall. On the top of the fence is barbed wire. There's only one way in and one way out in front of the building at the opening of the parking lot that meets the side road that it's located off of. The side road is about 3 miles away from the main road, which leads to the highway. The fence is completely surrounded by woods. There are literally no buildings, houses, or any other signs of civilization for miles around. Due to my seniority, I get to work whatever shifts and days I want. Typically, I choose to work mornings or evenings, and have weekends or Fridays and Saturdays off. But unfortunately, after a few months of us being at this new contract, we started having trouble keeping the overnight people. During the day, there's usually about 3 guards working all 7 days of the week. On the overnight shift during the weekdays, there's 2 guards, and on the overnight shift during the weekends, starting Friday to Sunday, there was only 1 guard. I should mention before I go any further that every guard is armed on every shift. As I said, we're having trouble keeping people on the overnight shift, mainly on the weekend overnight shift. Because of this, my supervisor asked me if I could help out until they could hire more people and work some overtime on the weekend overnight shifts. I could have, and in hindsight should have said no thanks, but at the time I actually needed the extra money because I was getting ready to move to a new apartment soon, so I went ahead and accepted the extra shifts. The first couple of weeks were fine, no issues, nothing strange. But what happened on the 3rd weekend is what made me regret my decision for the overtime. It was a Saturday night around 2 a.m. There was a very bad thunderstorm going on outside. I was sitting in the camera control room, which is on the top floor. The control room has a window that oversees the back part of the parking lot. In the room, there's 3 large-sized computer screens that show the CCTV live feeds from all the cameras located throughout the building, as well as the few cameras that are outside in the parking lot and by the entrance/exit of the parking lot. I was sitting in the control room doing what I normally was doing while working overnight by myself. I had the lights off watching movies I previously downloaded on my phone, while also playing games on my Game Boy. I had been sitting down for a while and got up to stretch my legs and move around a bit. I was also starting to feel a little sleepy and was thinking about going down the hall to the vending machine and grabbing an energy drink. After I got up and walked around the control room for a bit, stretching my legs, I went over to the window, peeked through the blinds to look outside. As I was watching, I was looking at all the heavy wind and rain blowing the random debris around. I was just about to walk away from the window to grab that energy drink, when all of a sudden, a flash of lightning lit up the surrounding area past the fence, and just then, I saw a figure dart from one tree to another that was a good distance from it, I'd say about 20 feet. I kept my position, looking in that direction through the blinds, waiting for another flash of lightning to see if I could see exactly what it was, or if my eyes were playing tricks on me. After a couple of seconds went by, another flash struck. This time, I didn't see anything near or around the tree that I saw the figure move to. At that point, I thought clearly my eyes were playing tricks on me and that it was just me being tired. I left from the window and went down the hall and got the energy drink. I immediately downed the whole thing, hoping that it would kick in soon. I was finished with it by the time it took me to walk back to the control room, which wasn't long, only about 5 minutes. I got back to the control room, and I immediately noticed that one of the camera feeds had been knocked out on one of the screens. It was the camera feed to the back part of the parking lot that the window overlooked. I went over to the window and looked out the blinds in the direction of the camera. I spotted it dangling in the wind from its wires from the post that it was on. I figured the heavy winds must have knocked it off somehow. I sat back at my desk and put in my report for the night, and then went back to what I was originally doing. A few minutes had passed while I was watching a movie on my phone, and I heard the alert sound the system gives when someone is accessing a part of the building that requires a code to be entered on a keypad. I looked at the main screen and pulled up the tab that shows the access points of the building. It showed me the one being accessed was the one in the back of the building by the back parking lot. At that point, a shiver ran down my spine as I realized someone was outside. From the shadow figure, to the camera being knocked out, and now to this, the keypad being accessed. Whoever it was had the code because they got in, and the system showed me the green light. I thought to myself, it couldn't be another worker or security guard. If it was a worker, we would have a memo telling us who it was and what times they would be here, as well as what part of the building they would be in. I knew it wasn't a security guard because I would have known about that too. I picked up the phone that was on my desk in an attempt to call the cops, but it was out. I looked at my phone, and of course, no service. I figured the best thing to do would be to try to walk around the hallway and try to get service on my phone. I left out of the control room and into the hallway. I started walking down the hallway toward the service stairwell while looking at my phone, hoping to get a signal soon. Just then, as I was looking down at my phone, the power was shut off. I immediately decided, since I was so close to the stairs, that I was going to run down the stairs to the front lobby and run out the door to my truck. I got to the stairwell and opened it up. It was damn near pitch black in there. I decided to use the darkness to my advantage and walk quietly down the steps. I figured if this person cut the power, they had to be in the generator room, which was in the basement. Unfortunately, the basement was the only flight of steps below the lobby where I was headed. Also, the generator was not too far away from the stairwell that I was in. I made it down to the 4th floor, and suddenly I heard a door open at the bottom of the stairwell. I stopped dead in my tracks. At this point, I knew I was armed, but I was thinking to myself, even though I went through training, I don't think I was ready to shoot anyone. I was hoping and praying that it wouldn't come to that. As I was standing there, immersed in my thoughts about my training with my firearm, I started hearing heavy footsteps walking up the stairs. I wasted no time in coming up with a new plan. I was going to turn around and walk as quickly and quietly back up the steps as possible to the 6th floor where I came from. At the top of the steps, a few feet past the door, still in the stairwell, there's a ladder that leads up to the hatch that leads to the roof of the building. I was going to climb up the ladder to the top just before you have to open the hatch to go any further, and just hide in there in the pitch black darkness until whatever happens next. I turned around. Just as I did, my gun banged against the metal to the stairwell railing, making a loud clang sound. As that happened, I froze, and so did the heavy footsteps. A few seconds had gone by, and then I heard whoever it was running as fast as they could up the steps. I sprang as fast as I could, running up the steps as if my life depended on it. As I got to the top of the steps, just before I was about to pass the door I had come from, I had an idea to create a diversion on the fly. I quickly opened up the door hard and loud, then let go of the handle and let it close and slam on its own. I continued to run to the ladder and climb up it. By doing that, I would make it appear that I had run out the door. With only seconds to spare, I made it up the ladder. The man, distracted by the door tactic, opened it without even looking in my direction. He ran into the hall, the heavy door closing behind him. That's when I saw my chance. I leapt down from the ladder, only about 10 feet high, landing with a loud thud as my feet hit the floor. I bolted for the stairs. The man must have heard the sound, because I had barely made it down one flight before I heard the door open again and his footsteps pounding down after me. Both of us were sprinting as fast as we could. I managed to stay one floor ahead of him the entire way. When I reached the lobby, luck was suddenly on my side. Behind me, I heard a loud crashing noise followed by a cry of pain. I wasn't certain, but I think the man had tripped and fallen on the stairs. I wasn't about to wait around to confirm. I burst through the door, ran straight for the entrance, and used my key to unlock it. Fortunately, I always parked my truck close by. With the wind howling and the rain pouring down, I hit the fob to start the engine and unlock the doors as I sprinted across the lot. I jumped into the truck, threw it in reverse, and just then caught sight of him. Dressed all in black, his face covered by a mask and hood, bursting out of the building and charging toward my car. I slammed the gear into drive and floored it, tires screeching as I tore out of the lot and onto the side road. It wasn't until I was nearly at the main road that I got a signal on my phone. I immediately called the police. They arrived about 15 minutes later, and I followed them back to the building. I told them everything, filling out reports for both them and my company. We searched the entire building and surrounding area, but found nothing. The scariest part came when they checked the stairwell. Apparently, when the man had fallen, he dropped something. The police recovered a fully loaded, unregistered, semi-automatic handgun. To this day, no one knows why someone would have broken into that building. There was nothing particularly special about it, except that it was government property. Whatever the case, I'm just thankful that luck was on my side that night. I used to work nights as a security guard in a medium-sized corporate office building in New Jersey, and for the most part, the nights were boring, quiet, and uneventful, which is why what happened one night has stuck with me so vividly for years. It started around midnight, after the last employees had left the building and the lobby was empty except for me, just me and the glow of the security monitors. My job was simple: check cameras, make a couple of patrol rounds, log any incidents, and mostly just sit and watch for anything unusual. That night, I was going through my usual routine, scanning the screens for the elevators, the hallways, and the underground parking garage, when I noticed a figure moving between the cars on the lower garage feed, which immediately caught my attention because the lot should have been completely empty at this hour. Only people with 24-hour access could get in, and I knew no one had it at that moment. At first, I thought it might have been one of the late shift IT guys, or maybe a cleaning crew member, but it didn't make sense, since cleaning crews had left hours before and the guy wasn't carrying any equipment or wearing a uniform. He was wearing a long dark coat that looked a little oversized, and he wasn't heading to any particular car or toward the exit. He just moved slowly, weaving around the rows like he was inspecting the area or making sure no one was around, and something about the way he moved gave me the chills. I couldn't put my finger on it, but it was off. I called the supervisor and explained what I was seeing, and he told me to stay at my post and keep an eye on the cameras, which I did, but my gut told me I needed to check it in person. So I grabbed my flashlight and headed down to the garage. The elevator ride was long, slow, and every floor that passed seemed to echo in the shaft, making me more on edge than I cared to admit. When the doors opened on the garage level, I scanned the lot with my flashlight, and it was empty, completely quiet, the kind of quiet that presses against your ears and makes every little creak of the building sound huge. I called out, "Hello, security here," but the echo returned empty, and I didn't hear any reply. I walked slowly down the rows of cars, shining the light into every dark corner, every space between vehicles, but there was nothing there. Not a single shadow, not a single person. My pulse was racing, and I started to doubt myself, thinking maybe the camera was malfunctioning, or maybe it had picked up a shadow that wasn't really there. So I went back upstairs to the lobby, trying to shake it off. But as soon as I sat back down and looked at the garage feed again, there he was, standing in the exact same spot, as if he hadn't moved since I'd been there. And now my stomach dropped, because I knew I had just been there, and there was no way he could have gotten back into the same spot unnoticed unless he had been watching me, or worse, waiting for me. I radioed my supervisor again, telling him I was going to keep watching the cameras, and he told me not to approach him unless absolutely necessary, which was easier said than done because I couldn't stop staring at him, and my mind was already running through every possible scenario. For the next 20 minutes, I watched him wander slowly toward the stairwell that led to the upper floors. He moved carefully, pausing, looking over his shoulder like he was checking for someone, and then disappeared from the camera just before reaching the door, which made my stomach knot. I checked every other feed, hallways, elevator lobbies, even the rooftop access, and there was nothing. No trace of him at all, which only made me feel worse because it was impossible for him to vanish that fast, and it gave me the sinking feeling that he had access to the building somehow, or he was hiding in a way that I couldn't see. I stayed at my desk, heart pounding, until the elevator dinged and opened in the lobby. Nobody was inside, but on the polished floor, I noticed wet footprints leading from the elevator out into the main lobby. Bare feet, which was wrong on so many levels because it was freezing outside, and he would have had to take his shoes off just to wander barefoot. I froze in my tracks, realizing that if he was inside the building now, he could be anywhere, and every unlocked office or storage room was a potential hiding spot. I called the local off-site patrol for backup and debated locking myself in the lobby. But something in me told me I needed to do a patrol and confirm the situation, which in retrospect was probably a mistake. I took the elevator to the 5th floor and started walking the hallway slowly, flashlight in hand, scanning every office door, checking for movement. Every creak of the building made me jump. Halfway down the hall, I saw one of the office doors slightly ajar, which shouldn't have been possible because it was always locked at night. I pushed it open with my flashlight, peering inside, but the room was empty except for a sleeping computer monitor and a chair pushed in under the desk. Nothing else. I stepped out into the hall again and froze because I heard the sound of footsteps on the tile behind me. Not mine. Heavy, wet, and uneven, moving fast towards me. My heart leapt into my throat, and I swung my flashlight around the hall, catching a glimpse of the dark coat at the end of the hallway. He wasn't running, but he was walking fast with a purpose, and it hit me that he had been following me the entire time, hiding just out of sight whenever I checked the cameras. I bolted, sprinting down the hall toward the stairwell, barely noticing the handrail slamming against my arm as I rushed past. The footsteps followed, close enough that I could hear them clearly now, echoing in the hall. And I realized I had no idea how he had gotten inside, no idea what he wanted, and the panic was almost suffocating. I dove into the stairwell, sliding down a few steps, and slammed the door behind me as the footsteps thundered on the floor above. Then they stopped abruptly, and I sat there shaking for several minutes, trying to catch my breath and convincing myself I had imagined it. But the sound of my own breathing and the echo of those steps made me feel insane. When the patrol finally arrived, I was pale, sweaty, and trembling. We walked the building together, floor by floor, room by room, and the garage was completely empty. No sign of the intruder, no footprints, nothing. And when we checked the cameras, the footage from the time he appeared had been overwritten or corrupted, leaving a gap in the recording that made my skin crawl even more. I quit that job within a month, partly because of the fear, and partly because I couldn't handle walking the hallways alone anymore. Especially when the garage was empty and the wind outside made the building creak, because every shadow and every noise reminded me of him walking behind me, just out of sight, waiting. Even years later, I get anxious in parking garages or office buildings at night, and I still check over my shoulder more than I should, thinking I might see that long coat rounding a corner, hearing those wet footsteps behind me again. And I know that what I experienced wasn't supernatural. It wasn't a faceless ghost or a phantom. It was a real person, a stalker, and the thought that he had been inside that building following me, hiding just out of view, and that I might never know how he got in or what he wanted, is something that still haunts me every time I think about that night. This happened to me a few days ago. As a matter of fact, it was my first night of training as a mobile security guard. Before I tell you my story, just want to clarify that a mobile security guard is primarily a security guard that drives around in the vehicle and does site visitation where the client needs security. In this case, it's the GTA of Toronto, but this incident took place at a nearby pharmacy/medical clinic in Mississauga. It was my first night as a trainee, and my supervisor was a nice person, showing me around on how to conduct patrols, write reports, disarm fire alarms, etc. Usually, if an alarm occurs, dispatch notifies us through the radio and asks us to attend the site where the alarm is happening. However, we arrived at the medical clinic in Mississauga to conduct a regular perimeter patrol, which also meant there was no alarm. We arrived on the site around 1:15 a.m. to make sure everything was normal, but as we got out of the vehicle and approached the building, something was terribly wrong. For one, the underground parking garage was left open, and two, the front door of the building was busted open. My supervisor then said, "What the f***, how is this possible? If somebody broke in, the alarm should be on." I did not know how to react to this, as this was my first time at the site, and according to my supervisor, this was a new contract that the security company I work for got. We stepped in the building cautiously, but all of a sudden my supervisor says, "Look at the elevator, it's going up at different levels." Sure enough, he was not kidding, as the elevator was moving from G1, 2, 3, and stopped at level 4, which was the very top. I asked my supervisor if he thinks someone was in here. He immediately nods and pulls out his baton. At that very moment, I was feeling sick to my stomach and started breathing heavily. At that point, I hated my job and did not want to be there. We immediately went inside the elevator and went straight to the top level. I was getting a bad feeling, and some adrenaline was rushing through my body before the elevator door was about to open. As we were going up each level, I was thinking to myself, like, what if something happens, or whoever this person or thing is might not leave without a fight, and possibly even charge at us as the elevator door opens. However, luckily as we arrived at the 4th floor, no one was in front of us, but it was extremely dark. Therefore, we turned on the lights and started investigating the rooms of that floor. My supervisor told me to stick with him, as even he was feeling uncomfortable. He said, I quote, "Make sure you stick with me and get ready to bust this f***." Luckily, no one was there, so we were very shocked and didn't know what was happening, until we heard footsteps going down the stairwell. My supervisor and I were about to open the door to the stairs and chase whoever it was inside. However, just then, the footsteps stopped and it was very quiet. We could only hear each other's breathing. What my supervisor said next to dispatch is something I will never forget and still is rattling around in my head. A4, call C25, go ahead. Dispatch, we need immediate backup. Please be advised someone's in the building with us and they're hiding downstairs, possibly armed and waiting for us to come towards them so he or they can ambush us. Dispatch then tells us to stay where we are and not approach the suspect or whoever it was downstairs, as backup will be arriving shortly. At that point, my supervisor started panicking and it just made the situation even worse. I mean, he should be the one to lead and not feel worried. But then again, I don't blame him, as this experience was overwhelming and horrifying for me. Now, my supervisor is only a couple of years older than me, so I preferably call him bro instead of sir or whatever. Bro, just don't worry. I'm sure backup will be arriving shortly, I told him. You might be wondering why we could not hit the exit and run for it. Well, you see, the suspect is on the ground floor, which means he could be anywhere. So with the elevator making noises, he or she could be alarmed and immediately stand in front of the elevator blocking our way. The suspect could approach us by coming upstairs, but I guess that he or they figured we could attack him by surprise, so maybe that's why he was quietly waiting at the corner for us downstairs. 15 minutes later, we heard the door open. It was our senior supervisor, and his voice echoed out, "Security." My supervisor radioed him and said, "Sir, we're upstairs. Be careful, there's someone downstairs." A few minutes later, the senior supervisor met us upstairs and told us to come investigate with him. Therefore, we did. But we looked everywhere downstairs and then each floor and found no one. As we were at the 3rd floor scanning each room and bathroom to see if the person was there, we heard the front door open and heard footsteps running outside. We were not fast enough to see who it was, because by the time we got to the ground floor, the suspect was gone. Both my supervisor and I were in shock, because we looked everywhere and did not find anyone. Either that person was in a very good hiding spot, or that medical clinic center was haunted. I don't think I'll ever know, but this was by far the most horrific experience of my life, and coming this weekend, I'll be there again for site visitation, but this time alone, as I'll be trained by then. My name is Garrett, and this took place when I was a sophomore in college. When I didn't get a dorm after freshman year, I scrambled for off-campus housing. Long story short, I ended up in a co-op, part of a 3-house community that was sort of near campus, but not really. It wasn't ideal, but it was cheap, and I didn't have many options. Plus, I had a bike, so I didn't really mind the extra travel time. Most of the residents were young students like me, but there were a few exceptions. There were a handful of alumni, 1 or 2 TAs, and a few older people getting their degrees later on in life. But the person who immediately stood out to me was an older woman who lived in one of the other houses. From what I could tell, she was maybe in her late 50s, even though she looked a little older than that. She had graying hair and walked with a sort of limp, like she had some kind of back injury. She was really quiet and mostly kept to herself, and she always had this blank expression on her face. I assumed she had some kind of connection to the university, maybe faculty, or maybe an alumni, but no one explained, and I didn't ask. The first time I saw her do something strange was in our common kitchen, which was a little weird to begin with because the 2 other houses had their own kitchen, so I wasn't sure why she'd be hanging out in ours. She wasn't cooking or eating or even talking to anyone. She was just standing there while the rest of us were talking and running around, making dinner and listening to music. She didn't try and join in, she just watched us blankly. I caught eyes with her a few times, and part of me got the feeling that she was watching me specifically, even though I knew that was unlikely. No one acknowledged her, which I thought was a little weird too. Maybe they knew something I didn't. Later that week, I was doing some homework in my room when I saw her again. I glanced out my bedroom window, and there she was, staring up at me. As if that wasn't strange enough by itself, she wasn't even on the sidewalk, but rather in the middle of the street. It was getting late, and it was decently cold too, so she must have been freezing out there. I couldn't tell if she was looking into my window or just in the general direction of the house, but I felt like she was staring at me specifically. I don't know why I did it, but I waved at her, trying to be friendly. The moment I did, I instantly regretted it. She didn't wave back. Instead, she jumped up and down a few times like she was excited and then ran towards one of the other houses, presumably hers. I felt kind of sick. Not only had I acknowledged her, but I had confirmed that she had been looking into my room the entire time, and even if she hadn't, she now knew which room was mine. Later that night, I asked one of my housemates about her. He told me that that woman had always been there and that I should try my best to ignore her like the rest of them did. I inquired further about her, but the guy genuinely didn't know anything and said he was just repeating what someone had told him when he moved in. It didn't sit right with me, so I asked around until I got some semblance of an answer. One of the seniors in the specific house she lived in told me that she was associated with the university and was a little kooky, but that she didn't have a history of violence or getting physical. I asked him why no one found that as strange as I did, and he told me that they really couldn't control who lived there, as that decision was up to the property manager. I wasn't fully satisfied with that answer, but there was nothing I could do, so I tried to just block her out of my mind. But then it got worse. One night, I walked out of my room and nearly ran into her. She was in the hallway, standing right in front of my door. I literally jumped back because she caught me so off guard. It was past midnight on like a Tuesday, so the house was mostly dead. She didn't say anything when she saw me. She barely even reacted. Instead, she just turned and walked away as if I were the one who had intruded on her. I'm not going to go into every little detail, but there were several more occurrences like that one where I caught her either snooping somewhere where she had no business being or doing something she had no business doing. At some point, I lost my room key. All 3 houses had once been part of the same hotel, so all the rooms had personal locks and keys. It was a co-op, so most people just left their doors unlocked, but I was someone who couldn't sleep comfortably knowing someone could just walk into my room, so losing my key was a big deal. Everyone had a spare, including me, but I was pissed because I'd have to go make a copy of the key, and that was an extra annoyance I couldn't afford at the time. A few nights later, I woke up randomly in the night. I wasn't sure why at first, but then I heard it. There was a soft bumping coming from my closet every 20 seconds or so. It sounded like something shifting behind the door, like something was moving inside of my closet. I'm not one to scare easily, and I'm definitely not one to be helpless in a dangerous situation, so I was going to deal with this myself. I quietly got out of bed and took a deep breath. I slowly walked over to the closet, trying to keep my breathing under control. My heart was racing. In one fluid motion, I ripped the closet door open and screamed like a crazy person. Just as I expected, the woman was in there. She had one of my ties wrapped around her neck, and her eyes were wide open. She was holding a kitchen knife with her other hand. My scream must have startled her, because before I could react, she lunged at me with the knife outstretched. I screamed again, only this one wasn't pretend. It was a scream of pure fear. I wrestled her to the ground and was able to disarm her pretty easily, given how frail and small she was. That didn't make the situation any less terrifying, though. She kicked and fought and bit as I pinned her to the ground, screaming the whole time. I yelled for help, and I heard some doors slam, followed by some of my housemates running down the hall. My friend Lee immediately helped me immobilize the woman, and the two of us kept her pinned while someone else called the police. The rest of the night was a blur. The police got there quickly and arrested her on the spot. By that point, she had stopped screaming, but she refused to say anything either, which was extremely unsettling. The cops found my room key on her. Real big shocker there. A few weeks later, we got our answer about who she was. Apparently, she was the property manager's sister, who he had been letting live there under the radar. She had severe mental health issues, and instead of getting her proper care, he had just thrown her into one of the unoccupied rooms. I believe the property manager was eventually arrested for negligence and a slew of other things, and rightfully so. I honestly blame him so much more for what happened than her. If anything, I feel bad for her, but my pity won't erase the fact that she tried to kill me. I could have lost my life that night. I have no idea why she seemed so interested in me specifically, but I can only hope nothing like that ever happens to me again. I'm graduating soon, and I'm definitely going to miss college, but I don't think I'll ever be able to look back on my time here without thinking about that night. This isn't really my story, but I essentially watched the whole thing happen, so I'm telling it anyway. I've lived in a modest 2-story home with my husband Benjamin for the better part of 20 years now. All of our kids are out living their own lives, and I couldn't be prouder. What I'm about to tell you happened last year. Someone had just moved into the house across the street, which was really nice because I was getting sick of looking out at a vacant house all the time. I'm retired, so I spend a lot of time on my front porch, knitting, reading, enjoying the weather with my husband, you name it. I also listen to a lot of true crime podcasts out there, and sometimes I'll just play music. The person who moved into the house across the street was a young guy, maybe mid-20s. He drove an expensive-looking BMW and always dressed in flashy clothing, so I figured he was either well-off or seriously pretending. I hope I'm not giving the wrong impression about him. He was actually really sweet. He introduced himself to us after a few days. His name was Quinn, and he was a few years out of college, like I had guessed. He was a really bright guy and got along really well with Benjamin. They laughed and talked about sports, and Benjamin even dropped a few of his own college stories that I hadn't heard in a long time. Quinn said he worked in the entertainment industry, and that he did freelance work for some internet personality person, whatever that means. It kind of went over my head, but it must have been lucrative. He looked pretty wealthy, like I said. He talked about stocks with Benjamin, and told us about some of the investments he was making. All in all, he seems like a nice guy. Things were normal for a few months. Like I said, I spent a lot of time on my porch, so Quinn would often wave to me when leaving his house, and I always waved back. I can't remember exactly when, but I started noticing the same girl going over to Quinn's house every so often. She drove a little white convertible and she was pretty, young, blonde, the type of girl you'd expect a guy like him to date. To be frank, she dressed a bit scandalously, which I didn't fully appreciate. I figured she was his girlfriend, maybe checking on the house while he was out. She had her own house key, so it made sense. It became a regular thing. Once, maybe twice a week, I'd see that car roll up while Quinn was gone. She'd go inside, stay for a while, then leave. I didn't really understand what she was doing, but young people date differently these days, so I kept my thoughts to myself. Then, one evening, I saw them together. Quinn pulled into his driveway with her in the passenger seat. That confirmed it. She was his girlfriend. just as I had assumed. But shortly after that day, things started getting tense. At least, that's what it seemed like. One afternoon, I was out tending to my little garden when I heard shouting from across the street. Quinn and the girl were standing in the driveway yelling at each other. I couldn't catch what they were arguing about, but I didn't need to. She kept throwing her hands in the air, practically spitting her words at him. It looked like she was going to strike him. Eventually, she got in the car, slammed the door, and tore off down the road. Quinn shook his head and went back inside. I don't even think he noticed me. I figured it was a lover's spat. Every couple fights, and it wasn't my place to butt in where I was unwelcome. But then I saw that girl's car in front of his house again when he wasn't home. Not once, not twice, but multiple times. I told Benjamin, and he said it was rude to pry and that I should just leave the poor boy alone, which I agreed with. But then came the night everything went sideways. Benjamin and I were asleep when we woke up to sirens blaring outside. We rushed outside, joining the handful of neighbors who had come out to see what was going on. Quinn's house was swarming, police cars, an ambulance, the whole nine. We watched as the cops emerged from his house with that girl in handcuffs. She didn't struggle or scream, just accepted what was going on and stared ahead with a blank expression. We saw Quinn being rushed outside on a stretcher. He was a bloody mess, and I gasped at the sight. We didn't see him for a week after that. I was worried sick. When he finally came back, Benjamin and I walked over to check on him. He let us in without hesitation and told us everything. Apparently, that girl, her name was Ellie, had confessed to everything, making things easy for the police. For starters, she wasn't supposed to have his house key. She had stolen his spare and made a copy without him knowing. According to him, she started asking him for things. Fancy dinners, jewelry, expensive trips. When he hesitated, she got possessive and angry, which was when things started going downhill in their relationship. Every time she had shown up unannounced to his house, he hadn't been aware. She had access to his location through his phone, which I didn't even know was possible. She had gone through all of his stuff, but worst of all, she had planted hidden cameras in his room. Every time she went back to his house when he wasn't there, she was replacing the camera batteries and making sure they were still working. The argument between them that I overheard was Quinn's attempt at breaking up with her. She refused, and Quinn reluctantly agreed to go on a break. Ellie had seen everything through the cameras, and the next night, she went to his house with a knife. I'm not going to explain the rest, you get the idea. Somehow, Quinn managed to get her to the grounds, but not before she seriously injured him. The doctors said he was an inch away from needing surgery, or dying. Benjamin and I tried to console him, but he was visibly shaken. The last thing he said before we left was that he had learned his lesson about flaunting his money, especially around pretty girls. He moved out not long after. He said he didn't feel safe in that house anymore, and that his ex had tons of friends just like her, and he didn't feel comfortable with the thought that they might have known where he lived. We never saw him again. I pray to God he's doing okay. No one should ever have to go through something like that, especially not someone as young as him. When I moved into my new place, I was just looking for a fresh start. I won't get into the details, but let's just say I had a bad situation with an ex that made staying in my old city impossible. I ran into some money early in life and made some bad decisions about the kind of women I surrounded myself with. Lesson learned. The neighborhood I moved to is really nice. Low crime, quiet, mostly families. The houses here are really spaced out, which was partially what drew me there. But for some reason, the property next to mine is much closer in proximity than most of the other properties are to each other. And by the way, that house next door is huge. When I first saw it, I thought I could easily fit a family of 10. That's honestly what I assumed at first, that a big family lived there, grandparents and everything. But I could not have been more wrong. Even though I tried to be low-key, I wasn't going to be a rude neighbor. I took it upon myself to introduce myself to everyone in the neighborhood. For whatever reason, I decided to introduce myself to my next-door neighbors last. I couldn't tell you why. Everyone else I met seemed really sweet and genuine. I'd say 90% of them were parents of young children. And yes, they were all slightly intimidating, purely based on how successful they seemed to be. I wasn't too sure how a younger guy like myself would easily blend into a community like that, but that was more of a personal concern. When I got around to meeting my next-door neighbor, my social battery was mostly drained from having spent the day making small talk with strangers. I knew if I just went back home, I was never going to be as motivated to meet them, so I just sucked it up and walked up their driveway. I had gotten accustomed to being greeted by someone middle-aged, so when a young-looking dude in a mullet opened the door, I was a little taken aback. Hell, he looked even younger than me, which was definitely a shock. I recovered quickly and went ahead with my new-to-the-neighborhood spiel. As I went on, he flashed me this massive smile and actually cut me off before I could even finish talking. He said something along the lines of, "Oh wow, someone who was born in my decade, what a nice surprise." I laughed and told him the same thing, venting to him about how out of place I felt as a single guy in his late 20s amongst so many families with kids. He told me not to worry about that, and that most of the people who lived here kept to themselves, which was kind of a relief for me. He introduced himself as Damon, and told me I should come by for a drink sometime. I shrugged my shoulders and said, hell, why not right now? To which I expected him to laugh and invite me in. Instead, though, he looked over his shoulder like he was scanning his living room, and then he turned back to me, saying he wished he could, but he was busy working. I asked him what he did for work, because it just seems like a normal follow-up question to what he said, and he dropped his smile a bit. After a weird stare, he laughed and just said, finance, but didn't elaborate any more than that, which I thought was a bit strange. I told him fair enough, and asked if he had any roommates. To my surprise, he told me he lived there alone, which was absolutely insane to me given how big the house was. We chit-chatted for a few more minutes, and he gave me his number before going back inside. I was excited that someone my age lived here, especially because he seemed like a really chill guy, but I couldn't get over how odd it was for someone like that to live all alone. And yeah, I know I was essentially doing the same thing, but you have to keep in mind my house wasn't even half the size of his. Anyway, I went back home and got on with my life. That was about 6 months ago. For a few weeks after that, nothing eventful really happened. I texted Damon a few days after he gave me his number to try and set something up, but he'd always complain about how busy he was and how sorry he was that we couldn't hang out. Eventually, I gave up with him. Not in a hostile way, just in a you do you kind of way. I'm definitely not the type of person to bend over backwards for someone who seems disinterested. I never saw anyone coming or going from Damon's place. No visitors, no parties, no girls, nothing. He never even got takeout delivered, which was strange to me because his car was always in the driveway. I genuinely didn't know what he ate because I literally never saw him leave the house. The guy lived like a ghost. I work from home, and the office in my house is on the 3rd floor, which overlooks Damon's property, if you're wondering how I knew so much about his living habits. I know it sounds obsessive and a little creepy, but his house was also just a glance away from my monitor, so I couldn't help but look over from time to time. One night, it was a Wednesday night, I remember that distinctly. I woke up around 2 a.m. to the sound of loud music. I sleep with my windows open, so that's probably how I woke up so easily. At first, I thought I was imagining it, or it was part of a really vivid dream I was having, but I was wrong. I got out of bed and peeked out my window, and there they were, 7 or so cars lined up in Damon's driveway. There was no mistaking it, he was having a party. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not the type to complain about some noise. I've been to my fair share of house parties, but it was the middle of the week, and the volume was insane. I figured I'd just go over, knock, and ask him to turn it down. I threw on a hoodie and walked over. It was a full-blown party, that much was clear from outside. I knocked on the door, but no one answered. I pulled out my phone to text Damon, but I decided against it, knowing he'd probably ignore me and give me some BS excuse the following morning. I knocked on the door again, harder this time. Still nothing. I reached for the handle, half expecting it to be locked, but to my surprise, the door swung open. Inside, the first thing I saw was a pile of shoes in the foyer, at least 10 pairs. But there was something off. There was literally no one in there. I moved further in, expecting to see people in the living room, maybe the kitchen, but it was completely empty. There weren't even any drinks left out. I could hear people over the music that was playing in the background though, which I didn't understand. But then I really listened to it, and everything hit me all at once. It wasn't even music, really. It was a recording, a literal recording of people laughing, yelling, clinking glasses. The whole party was fake, all of it. But that didn't make sense to me. It still didn't explain the shoes or the cars. There were people in that house, that much was certain. I should have turned around right then, but I needed to know what was going on. I moved discreetly around the house until I saw a door that was slightly ajar. I gently pushed it open and it led down to the basement. I'm not sure how I knew, but something told me what I was looking for was downstairs. It was dark down those stairs, with the exception of a very faint light coming from somewhere I couldn't see. There was no reason to go down there, I knew that, but I did it anyway. I got to the bottom of the stairs and looked around. The light was coming from another door somewhere deeper in the basement. I crept towards it, and as I got closer, I started to pick up on another noise I hadn't been able to hear earlier over the music. It sounded almost mechanical. It was this heavy, rhythmic grinding, like heavy machinery or a buzzsaw or something. I got a little closer, close enough to see through the crack. There were 3 people standing in there, looking across the room at something that was out of view. They were all older-looking guys, significantly older than Damon. They were wearing heavy-duty work clothes and had on these protective goggles and thick rubber gloves. I also realized they were wearing what looked like work boots, even though I had seen all those other shoes upstairs. Under different circumstances, I would have assumed that they were construction workers. I really wanted to see what they were looking at, but it was too far out of view. After a few seconds of me just standing there, I started to pick up on this awful bleach smell, or some kind of cleaning solution. That's what did it for me. I started to feel this awful pit in my stomach, like my life was in danger. I can't explain it. I turned to leave, trying to be as quiet as possible. As I was finding my way back to the stairs, the light from behind me suddenly dimmed, like someone had shut the door behind me. I didn't actually hear the door over the music, but I felt it. I sprinted up the stairs as fast as I could. I ran through the house and burst out the front door. I didn't run directly to my house. I jumped my own fence and made it to the backyard. I slipped in through my side door, locking it behind me. My chest was pounding, but under no circumstances could I let Damon or any of those other guys know it was me who had been snooping around. I gathered myself and went up to my office, making sure all the lights up there were off. I crouched down below the window and peeked over at Damon's house. There was no one there. But then, a few minutes later, the front door flew open and like 8 guys poured out, scanning the yard, the driveway, the street, but Damon wasn't with them. I could tell because everyone looked older, like those first guys I had seen. A few of them looked like they were arguing about something, but I couldn't make out what they were saying. One of the men actually shoved one of the other ones, and I thought they were about to start fighting in the street, but they didn't. Eventually, they all went back inside, and the music stopped soon after that. I stood at the window, trying to make sense of what had just happened. I thought about calling the cops, but what would I even say? The music wasn't playing anymore, and there was no real crime I could actually report. The thing I couldn't understand was how none of my other neighbors had a problem with the loud music, especially since most of them had children. I figured if they hadn't been able to hear it and I called the police, Damon would know it was me. And the shoes, I had no idea what that was about either. The people I had seen were all wearing boots. So did they bring extra pairs of shoes just to leave in the foyer? I had too many questions and I didn't know what to do, so I just went to bed. The next morning, I woke up and looked out my bedroom window. Every single car was gone, including Damon's. I went upstairs to try and get some work done, but I couldn't concentrate and found myself looking over at Damon's house every 5 seconds. After a few hours of his car not being there, I decided to go for a walk, partly to clear my head, but mostly to take some low-key glances through his windows. Nothing, though. Days passed and Damon still didn't return, or his car didn't at least. I was baffled with every passing day. I still couldn't figure out how my other neighbors had been able to sleep through all the noises that night, so I just straight up asked them. I went to a few houses and asked them if they had heard the party he had a few nights ago. No one knew what I was talking about, even after I told them which house it was coming from and how late it was. I thought I was going crazy. That was a few months ago now. The crazy thing is Damon still hasn't returned, and it's clear no one is maintaining his house, as the grass is starting to get really long, and there's an untouched pile of packages leaning against his front door. I don't know what to make of this. It could be nothing, but I feel like no one would go to such lengths to disguise what they were doing with a fake party unless it was something illegal. But would people going to such lengths really forget something as important as locking the front door? Maybe that's what those guys had been arguing about. I really have no idea, and the fact that none of my other neighbors seemed bothered by it makes me think I'm involved in some huge conspiracy or something. I know I'm just being paranoid, but I just have so many unanswered questions. When Damon returns, if he ever does, I'm debating whether or not I should just go and straight up ask him. It was early June 2017. I was taking a road trip with my 9-year-old son Tom to West Virginia to visit family. It was a long, stressful drive. My car didn't have working AC at the time, and it was an incredibly hot day, so we were a bit stressed out by the 6-hour mark. We had left later in the day, so we were still on the road by dark. I think it was around 9 p.m. when we were still on the interstate, and Tom started complaining that he needed to use the bathroom. There was already tension in the car before this, but his constant complaining brought about a slight argument between the two of us. It was about personal stuff I'd rather not share with the internet. At last, I saw a blue rest area sign zoom past us on the interstate, so I veered off into the rest area. It had a small building with 2 bathrooms, a couple vending machines, and a few benches. That was it. There were no other cars parked nearby besides some big white pickup truck. As I pulled up next to the building, Tom got out in a hurry and ran to the bathroom. I left the car on because I knew he'd be back soon. Like I said, I don't want to get into personal stuff, like why we had a bit of an argument, but it seemed we were at that stage where we weren't exchanging words anymore. I figured the rest of the ride would be silent. About a minute later, the back door opened and then shut. I wanted to say something to Tom, but I didn't know what to say, so I just stayed quiet and drove off. I noticed that the white pickup truck parked nearby was leaving as well. In fact, he was close behind me. I veered back onto the interstate and into the left lane, and the pickup truck did the same. I stepped on it a little, and so did he. He started flashing his lights, so I switched to the right lane, thinking he was nothing but an aggressive driver. But as soon as I switched to the right, so did he. He was still flashing his lights. I pulled into the right lane and started to slow down. He sped up, still in the middle lane, and when he caught up to me, he slowed down and lowered his window. I did the same, and he started yelling something to me, pointing at my car. He looked like a creepy, sketchy dude at first glance. I couldn't hear a word he was saying, so he pointed for me to pull over to the side. I told Tom to keep calm. In my head, I was saying if this guy tried to do anything funny, I would floor it. The pickup pulled up behind me on the grass, and the guy came out of his truck running to my car. I put the car back in drive as my heart was racing, ready to drive. But then he screamed, "Wait." He got to my window and said, "That's not your kid," and pointed to the back seat. As he said this, I was confused and said, "What?" He said, "That's not your kid that got in your car." Suddenly, the back right side door opened, and I turned to see someone getting out of my car, not my son Tom. I got out from the car, screaming at the tall person who seemed to be a fully grown man, but they had already disappeared into the woods. I looked at the driver of the pickup and thanked him as I suddenly panicked, thinking about what could have happened to Tom. I got back in my car, crossed the grass between the interstate, and drove back to the rest area. The guy in the pickup followed me. We got back there in like 30 seconds to find Tom waiting outside the rest area bathroom. He got back in the car, all confused. I explained everything to him, almost out of breath, as did the pickup driver. I thanked the guy one more time before he drove back to the spot he was sitting in before. Tom was so intrigued about what just happened, and I was so disturbed that we were back on good terms again. We chatted the whole rest of the way and told family about it as soon as we arrived. I never even got to see what the person who got in my car looked like. Honestly, maybe I should be happy I never turned around to look at them, because I don't know what they would have done. My girlfriend and I took a road trip to California recently. The way there was completely normal. We left home early in the morning and got to the hotel by nightfall. On our way back home, however, we left midday and a majority of our ride was in the dark. The drive was about 10 hours each way, not including stops for food. We made 2 food stops, the first after about 3 hours of driving, then one more much later and deeper into the night. We got off the freeway at like 12:30 at night and went to the nearest Wendy's for food. We got right back on the freeway after that. I ate while I drove, which my girlfriend wasn't too fond of, but I just wanted to get home sooner rather than later. Shortly after getting back on the freeway, it started to rain. My girlfriend forced me to pull over now. She didn't want me eating and driving in poor conditions. As I pulled to the side, it actually started to downpour. I finished up eating my food, and then we heard a bang sound at the window. At first, I chalked it up to noises from the storm, but when I looked to my left out the window to see a figure blocking 90% of the window, along with the shriek of my girlfriend's, I nearly had a heart attack. I didn't want to roll down the window given how hard it was pouring, but over the sound of the torrential rain pounding on the car, I couldn't hear what the person was saying. I opened the door a crack and yelled out to the person, who turned out to be a woman. She was soaked already and looked disheveled and scared. She asked for a ride, and what was I going to do? Tell her no in these conditions? I told her to get in the back seat. My girlfriend gave me a look. I don't know what kind of look exactly, but it looks kind of like a "why the hell did you let her in" kind of look. I asked the woman where she was heading. She didn't answer. I caught my girlfriend giving me a look again because of this. I ignored her and turned around to look at the woman in the back seat, assuming she didn't hear me. But as creepy as it was, she was actually looking right at me with a cold, unfriendly face. I'd say it was a neutral, blank face, but something about it was just off-putting. I repeated my question, and she just shrugged her shoulders and laughed. I looked at my girlfriend, who was once again looking at me. I said out loud that I'd be dropping the woman off at the next town we crossed. I guess I was announcing that to both my girlfriends and the woman. As we got back onto the barren highway, there was a sudden ear-piercing screaming sound coming from right behind me, and the woman sitting behind me suddenly wrapped her arms around my throat. I slammed on the brakes as I was struggling to breathe, almost sliding into the divider. My girlfriend, quote, slashed at the woman's face with her long nails. The screaming turned from a deranged, angry kind of screaming to screams of pain and agony. I got out of the car as she had her hands pressed up against her face in agony. I then opened the back door, grabbed the woman with both hands, and literally threw her out of the car into the rain. She started begging, "Please, please," over and over as I looked down at her. But that's all she said. She cried as she kept saying the word "please." I ignored her and got back into my car and locked it. As I put the car in drive, there were bangs at the window as the woman started screaming again. Her screams once again sounded like the screams of a deranged mental asylum patient. I drove away casually as she was no longer a real threat, or at least not that I knew of. My girlfriend quickly got on the phone with the police and warned them of some suspicious, unstable woman lurking around the highway. We didn't stop again though. We went straight home from there, obviously a bit shaken up and whatnot, but I didn't want to be thinking about that incident for any longer than I had to. It was 2010. I was driving my Ford F-150 from my home in Pennsylvania to Georgia. I had family in the countryside of Georgia who I'd be spending the week with. It was going to be a drive of around 14 hours, and I planned on doing it all in one day. I got on the road at 10 a.m. I stopped once for lunch at some deli, and then 4 hours later I stopped at a rest area to eat the turkey sandwiches I packed in the cooler. After that, I didn't intend on making any other stops, besides for gas one more time, of course. At about 11:30 p.m., I had just filled up the tank one more time, and now I had an ETA of about 12:30. I was admittedly getting very tired now. I didn't think to get coffee at the gas station for some reason. The route the GPS was taking me down from the gas station seemed a little odd. I wasn't on the highway anymore. It was just taking me down some country-ass side roads. My truck is high up, so I got a good view of everything, and I also had a light bar installed, which really helped in lighting up these pitch black roads. I was so tired, and I knew I shouldn't have been driving anymore, but I was so close to my cousin's house that I had to keep going. I came to a stop sign and made a left turn off some quiet road onto an even quieter road. The speed limit on this road was 45 though, which was good. This road was empty of any kinds of buildings or houses. It was just woodland on either side. I was going like 55 to 60 miles per hour, blazing down this road since it really seemed like no other cars would be on this type of road at this hour. Then suddenly I saw like 4 shiny objects coming up fast in the road ahead of me. I slammed on the brakes, and as I got closer, I figured out what they were. They were traffic drums, like those big cylinder traffic cones. My truck managed to come to a halt before I rammed into the drums. I got out of my truck with my baseball bat, confused as hell. I went over to the traffic drums and realized there was something else behind the traffic drums. It was a spike trap, like the kind police use. I didn't know what to think. Was there some kind of police activity going on? Or did somebody set this up as a trap? I cautiously looked all around me as I inched back to my truck. Then I heard someone scream help. It came from the woods on the left side of the road. There was no way I was about to go into those woods. The most I was willing to do was call out, "What's wrong?" No answer. I walked to the edge of the road and looked into the forest. The only reason I could see anything was because of the lights from my truck. In the corner of my eye, I spotted him. Without looking directly at him, I saw someone crouched down behind a couple bushes. I didn't run, I just casually walked back to my car. When I got in and shut the door, I looked to my left to see 2 silhouettes by the edge of the woods on the side of the road, walking towards my truck. I drove the truck to the right side of the road onto the dirt and past the spike trap. I don't think they anticipated me actually going around, but when I looked in the rearview mirror, I saw at least 3 silhouettes standing by the traffic drums, lit up only briefly by the taillights of my truck. A few seconds later, they were gone out of my vision and out of my life forever. This was not something I would have ever expected to happen to me. Nevertheless, I'm glad I made it out alive.